Second.
Okay, we're going to take up first HB 82 relative to employment protection for participants in therapeutic cannabis programs. I'm going to make a motion of interim study. Do I have a second? Thank you. I was moved by Andrea Chatfield. She sort of was a mentor to me earlier in life. She is she's the chair for the HR Council of New Hampshire, State Council, and she talked about RSA 354A, the enforcement code, and she thought that under those provisions that this is already taken care of as far as protecting participants in the therapeutic cannabis program. So I was moved by that. She thought if we were to pass this bill, it would include smaller workforces of down to below 6 people. And it'd be a burden for small employers. And then she also brought up the impact of 82 would have on employers that are legally mandated to perform drug testing and prohibit the use of cannabis on jobs. This includes businesses that employ commercial truck drivers, as well as utility operators, prisons, healthcare workers. So for those reasons, I would like to interim study this bill for a year. Thoughts? Senator Shanley, I know you had thoughts on this.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments. I do think that there were guardrails in the bill. I would be fine with moving this forward because I do think folks in the program need certain protections. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, and do you believe that 354A would not give them those protections?
Yes.
I don't know if you have the handout in your folder that Andrea Chatfield had. Sort of in the middle of the section. She thought that was adequate protections for the employees with disabilities, and it would apply here. So I didn't want to be duplicitous.
Well, but there are, if I may, it
Yes,
seemed like there are people that are still encountering difficulties, and there are people that are not applying for jobs, and there are people that are still fearful. So I question whether what is in existing statute truly works for these folks. And that's why I would also support passage of the legislation.
okay. I'm going to move on my motion of interim study. All in favor of interim study? Aye. Opposed?
No.
2-2. I'll take it out.
Okay.
Senator Bradley, I'm going to introduce HB 645 relative to establishment of decentralized autonomous organizations as legal entities within the state that Representative Ammon brought before us. Do you have an amendment you'd like to bring forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so don't ask me to be able to explain it
Could somebody move on?
very well, which
I'd
is
make
why I asked Mr. Ardinger to be here. But as I looked through the hearing report, knowing I was going to sub for Senator Innes yesterday on this bill, I was struck by a couple of things. There was no opposition to it. I know that Representative Ammon has done a huge amount of work on these issues, and I don't think there's probably a better expert on many tax policies than Bill Ardinger in the state of New Hampshire. Bill chaired the commission that was set up, worked with all of the various interest groups. Secretary of State's office signed off. AG had a couple of concerns. That's what is reflected in this amendment to address them. So Again, I think if you want an explanation of the amendment, you should ask Representative Ammon or Mr. Ardinger, but knowing that the experts in the room support it, plus the AG's office now I believe is on board, I think we can pass it knowing that it's in good hands.
Thank you. I'm making a motion about to pass on the bill.
Yep.
Do I have a second? Senator Bradley seconds. Any other discussion?
So the amendment moved?
Yeah, I moved the amendment,
I'm sorry.
1775.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Is there anyone here from the AG's office? No.
Okay, we're gonna move forward. We'll have a vote on the ought to pass amendment. On the amendment, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No one? I will, oh, now we're gonna go to the underlying bill. Yep, all in favor of the ought to pass amendment with the, on the bill? Say aye. Aye. Opposed? One opposed, Shanley, I'm sorry. Yes, okay. Yes, okay, 3-1, thank you. I'll take it out. Okay, we're moving on to 1076 FN. It was relative to wine manufacturer licenses on premise. So the idea behind the bill was that we were going to treat it as we have treated the beer manufacturers. And I think that's a quick summary. Does anyone have any comments before I make a motion? I'll make a motion about to pass then. All in favor of the ought to pass or discussion?
We need a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the ought to pass motion?
Aye.
Aye. 4-0? Yep. Okay. Senator Shanley, you want to take that out? It's a good idea, though. I like that thought. Thank you. And what did I miss? Okay, we're moving on to HB 1178 relative to employees' unused earn time. Before I make a motion, Senator Shanley, did you have thoughts on this? We were discussing it a few minutes ago. Are you moving amendment 0950? No, we already did that. That's already,
If I would move, on to pass.
I'll second.
okay. Any discussion?
And I think the problem we have, I think we need to have this amendment drafted.
Okay.
Second amendment.
You're correct. So we should, want me to move to a different bill, suspend this one?
If we can, delay this.
Yeah.
until we get-
Okay. Yes,
Going to recess for a minute.
Yep.
and then-
thank you. Okay.
Meeting.
Yeah, see,
So I got the language for 1380. It actually never made it into drafting, but I
Okay.
have printout. I'll
okay.
make copies. I can
Okay.
get them.
Can I just do 1540 first?
Yep, we can do that.
Okay. We're going to move ahead to HB 1540 relative to the definition of full course meals and full course restaurants for purpose of alcohol licensing. We had come to, after the hearing, we decided that light meals. As long as you had a burger and fries and a drink, you wouldn't have to have a fancy dinner, table service, knives and forks. Just the basics are good in the live free or die state. So I am going to move that, the bill ought to pass as amended. Am I correct, Aaron, that there's an amendment, or was it 1540? Okay, we don't have one, so it's just ought to pass on the underlying bill. Any discussion? I'm sorry. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion?
Aye.
And that was you too, Senator Shanley? Yeah, okay, thank you. So 4-0. And Senator Susie, you want to take that out? Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute recess. Thank you.
I'm not opposed to.
We're just gonna be done with it. We're going back into executive session. We're going to revisit 1178, an act relative to an employee's unearned. Thank you. Seconded. Aaron, wherever you went, we moved into executive session. Again, we're doing 1178, and I'm making a motion of interim study on 1178. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Any discussion? Senator Shanley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a good bill. I think that I have an amendment being drafted. I believe that we should move forward and pass this bill. If I don't have an opportunity to pass it here today, I will likely bring a floor amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Again, second time in a day, I'm quoting a former teacher of mine, Andrea Chatfield of the State Council of New Hampshire Government Relations, and she discussed it being a long-term policy in New Hampshire of not dictating to employers what fringe benefits must be. We had employers who testified before us, they give written notice, they explain their vacation, sick leave schedules, and so no one's going into this blindly. Most of all the young people I know nowadays, my daughter, my son, his fiance from Microsoft, they're all working in a different type world than we used to work in. They let you take whatever you want. If you need a vacation, you take your vacation. If you need a sick day, they don't count every minute. But at the end of the day, there's no separate per se vacation time. It's a different world, and I think this bill is sort of living in the old world, but still it's not looking to our past policies in New Hampshire of letting the employers set the tone. So again, I have an interim study motion, and we will now call for the vote on it. All in favor of the interim study motion? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No?
Okay, do you want to take it out or you want me to? I'll take it out. Thank you. And that closes, do I have a motion to close the executive session?
So moved.
Second.
First and seconded, thank you. When Aaron's ready, Jeb, we'll have you do your amendment on the parking spaces. We're gonna do your amendment on the parking spaces. I'm just waiting for him. Yep. Senate Commerce is now in session. We're going to have the public hearing on proposed amendment 2024-1658 relative to residential parking spaces and the removal of unauthorized occupants of residential real property to HB 1400 relative to residential parking spaces. Senator Bradley? Good morning, Senator Bradley.
The record, Jeb Bradley from Senate District 3 and Wolfboro. And pleased to be here this morning with this amendment on House Bill 1400. Not commenting on the underlying bill, but rather here to introduce an amendment that deals with squatters. Squatters have become a problem in other states. I think all of us have seen news stories of people that have been away from their abodes to come home and find people illegally residing in their homes. I have been told of at least one example where it's happened in New Hampshire, and in working with the Senate Attorney, Rick Lehman, have found that we're rather silent on the issue of squatting. And so, given the fact that it is an issue in other locales, I think we should address it proactively, and that's what this amendment seeks to do. So let me try to walk you through what the amendment does. It was drafted by Mr. Lehman. So it creates a new chapter of unauthorized occupation of residential property. So it inserts after 540C the following chapter 540D titled the unauthorized occupation. It starts out with the findings and purpose that there should not be a right to squat, even though that term is not used, but it creates the opportunity to immediately vacate residential property as being one of the most important property rights if somebody is illegally occupying it. So then, going down through the proposed new chapter, if there is an unauthorized person, that the owner of the property may request from the sheriff of the county in which they reside the immediate removal of the person or persons per the following conditions. So those conditions start on line 26. The person who is requesting the removal of illegal occupants of the property must either be the property owner or the authorized agent. The property is being occupied as a residence. The unauthorized person has unlawfully entered. The property was not open to members of the public. The property owner has directed already the unauthorized person or persons to leave the property. The unauthorized person are not a current or former tenant. I think this is very important that we create this distinction. We're not talking about a past tenant. This committee wisely, in my opinion, rejected, I believe it was House Bill 1115, which we rejected last week on the consent calendar. This is not about the opportunity to evict somebody at the expiration of a lease. This is unauthorized and unlawful residency. And I think that lines 3 and 4 make that clear. Line 5 and 6, the unauthorized person is not immediate family members, and the last condition, no pending litigation. Then it goes through, the amendment goes through the process of how somebody is removed. In order to do that, you would submit a complaint, completed and verified on all these questions below on page 2. And you would have to submit that complaint to a sheriff of the county in which you reside, answering all the questions. And again, the current or former tenant language is repeated on line 31 to make it, again, crystal clear that that's what we are talking about. So I think that the 13 questions are self-explanatory on pages 2 and 3. And then on line 17 on page 3, it starts to outline how the complaint is acted upon all the way through the balance of the bill. The sheriff has the authority to arrest a person found in a dwelling for trespass or other outstanding warrants. The sheriff would be entitled to a fee for service for the notice of such, allow the sheriff to charge a reasonable hourly rate. And lastly, on page 4, there is cause of action language if somebody has been wrongfully removed. So again, I know that there's going to be some testimony about trying to fine tune this. I am more than happy and willing to, work with those folks, although time is short and this problem is real. And I don't think that we can leave the door wide open, so to speak, and unlocked for squatters until another legislative session. So for the folks that have some positive suggestions, I am willing to work with them, and I'm sure the committee is willing to work with them too. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate the opportunity for this rather late amendment, but I think a very important amendment.
Can I ask you a couple questions?
Yes, you may.
Real simple ones. Just because I live on a lake and we get tons of cottages, residential dwelling would that include summer homes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Just one hypothetical for you, just if it was someone I have a cottage I rent out, you were saying, so if it was someone who I had rented to once, would they have an exemption? Because they'd say, under your thing, if they had rented for a week, could they say, oh no, well, I've been a renter and am I gonna have problems getting rid of them?
This language is trying to distinguish from the bill that I cited,
Yep.
which I believe was House Bill 1115,
Okay.
where a lease might expire. So in that situation, somebody lawfully was able
Sure.
to reside in a property. This is very different. Somebody initially never had the lawful right to be in a property. And that is what I want to make sure is very clear.
Asked and answered, thank you. Any other questions? Senator Shanley?
Thank you. Why would we need this legislation? Why does trespassing law not cover this?
In the instance that we've seen in other states, that owners of property have had to go through long and arduous procedures, the normal eviction procedure, to remove somebody that was lawfully there. Now, it might be possible under trespass laws to remove somebody, but an example that I know of that happened in New Hampshire of a fraudulent lease being created, the people who were residing in the property thought they were there legally, but the lease was fraudulent. So nobody actually had the right, and the owner of the property had to go through the eviction process, which can take weeks or even months. And so that's why a simple trespass statute may not be sufficient.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your
Okay,
testimony.
thank you.
Roger Murray. Good morning, Mr. Murray. How you doing?
My name is Roger Murray. I'm a resident of Wolfboro. I'm a member of the Wolfboro Planning Board, but I'm not here today speaking for the board. And my opposition is limited to the parking space issue. And in fact, I support Senator Bradley's proposed amendment. The reason for my opposition is that one residential parking space per unit is simply not adequate. New Hampshire is not a one-size-fits-all state, and what might be appropriate in one area of the state is not necessarily going to be appropriate in another, and this is such a case. In Wolfboro and other less developed areas of the state with no public transportation, no taxis, and no Uber, most two-person households have at least 2 cars. If they're high school age children, they probably have more. And in those places, streets and roads are not designed or laid out to accommodate on-street parking. And there are no convenient private or municipal parking lots, no parking garages. If there is not off-street parking, there is no parking. The Wolfboro zoning ordinance has required 2 parking spaces for a single-family dwelling since at least 1967. This has never negatively impacted housing construction, but in fact, because of the flexibility the town has in its zoning ordinance, our multifamily ordinance requires fewer parking spaces per unit. If this bill were enacted into law, it would cause significant problems for places like Wolfboro if home builders were to decide to take advantage of the one space per unit limitation and not provide, and only provide one parking space. And I thank you for your consideration.
That's my question. Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. First, before.
Good morning. My name is Kirsten Cornell. I am an attorney at New Hampshire Legal Assistance. I'm here today to primarily express some concerns we have with regards to the way that the law is written, or I'm sorry, the amendment is written. I'm very happy to hear the willingness of the prime sponsor to work with people who are involved in this type of work to come to a solution that will meet the needs that people believe to be currently unmet. So we are aware that there is a belief both in the House and the Senate that that there's a problem with squatters in New Hampshire. It has not been our experience that this is something we've seen. In terms of the examples that have been given with regards to people coming into a home, while somebody is on vacation, at least in the state of New Hampshire, that would very much be a criminal trespassing charge. The police could be called. They would arrest the people who are there unlawfully, and they would be removed from the property. So in the state of New Hampshire, in order to gain any sort of property rights by what's called adverse possession, which is what is typically referred to as squatting, a person needs to openly occupy a property for 20 years. And so that's not somebody being in a unit for a short time. It requires that everybody would be aware that they were there in order to gain, what is typically considered squatter rights. Our concern with this amendment is that while I recognize that it was not the intent, we do believe that tenants will be swept up in this, sometimes lawful tenants. We do recognize that there are times when a tenant is present in a unit unlawfully and that there needs to be a way to address that, and that there are many circumstances where many different sort of configurations of facts that would lead to that situation. Our concern with the way that this is proposed right now is that the sheriff acts as a judge. It doesn't involve any court process. A person doesn't have an opportunity to show that they are there lawfully. It lacks some key definitions that we believe would be necessary in order to appropriately enforce it. And while there are some remedies within the writing, they're not particularly effective. So a perjury, so a false statement, would require a county attorney to bring an action against the person who made the false statement. And it's our experience that it is very uncommon for charges to be brought because of perjury. It is true that a private right of action is allowed. However, it's not clear what the process would be for that, which leaves us as lawyers to assume that it would be filing a lawsuit in Superior Court, which someone would probably need a lawyer to do properly, and a decision wouldn't be made for probably 6 to 8 months. So at that point, obviously, the person would be out for quite some time. We have been working with some folks in the House about a different amendment that I think tries to address a similar, if not the same issue. And we do have some proposed language that we have worked on with landlords that we agree to, which creates a a process through the statute RSA 540A, which would allow landlord to bring a quick claim against somebody who's not there lawfully. And I'm happy to talk to you about that more. I know that's not the purpose of this hearing, however, but I did want to let you know that we are already working with the landlord community in order to come to something that, in fact, we have developed something that we believe addresses the issue that does exist in an expeditious manner. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cornell. Just one question. On page 2 of the amendment, wouldn't that protect former tenants? Because it's unauthorized persons are not current or former tenants. Isn't he going to then not catch them in your net that you're afraid lawful tenants will
On
get caught?
page 2, I'm sorry, could you refer me to
I'm just looking at myself.
Oh, I see. No. So,
Let her up.
yeah, and that's one of the questions that we had was, there isn't really a definition of, what a former tenant would be. Like, is that 2 years ago, I rented this apartment from somebody and have lived, somewhere else for the 2 years since then. Is that person a former tenant? So that's an example of a definition that's not clear, that we believe is not clear and could potentially sweep up tenants. I also think that, without defining an unauthorized person, if I could give you just some examples of what we think may be swept up. So there are situations where perhaps a person has had somebody move into their apartment without the knowledge of the landlord, and then the actual tenant moves out. So those are the circumstances that the process that we are developing would address, because we're aware that on occasion that does happen. What we're concerned about this doing is if a person is residing there lawfully and they have an implied tenancy, which is, again, referenced later in the amendment, but it's not clear how that would be exactly determined by the sheriff, so an oral tenancy. We think that it's possible that it would be used to bring claims against folks who may not be able to immediately prove their tenancy and could then be quickly removed. So, again, I think that we're not trying to say that this isn't an issue to address, simply that it needs to be done carefully to ensure that it doesn't have unintended consequences.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is related to this discussion, and that is the use of the word unauthorized. And I'm just not sure what that would mean in this circumstance. In some ways, it seems obvious to me who would be authorized, and in other cases, I think I don't believe it's clear. Can you expand on that at all?
I would agree with your assessment. I think that a common issue when writing statutes and creating law is that upon immediate reflection, it seems like something would be obvious, but when you look at it a bit further, especially from the perspective of the law, it is not clear. So one of the things that we had actually flagged in our analysis was the lack of definition of unauthorized.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Happy to be here on this beautiful day. My name is Ben Kramer. I'm a new resident of Portsmouth. I moved last weekend since I talked to you last. Thank you. No, I was in Newmarket the last time.
Okay.
We saw each other, and I recently moved to Portsmouth just last weekend. I am organizing director at New Hampshire Youth Movement. We are a young people's organization with over 100 dedicated members and 5,000 supporters, ages 15 to 30 across the state. I'm here today and on all of these housing bills because housing is a chief concern of young people this session and in these years. Although I strongly support the underlying bill, the parking bill, as a good bill that addresses housing affordability and the supply gap that we have to fill, we oppose this amendment for a lot of the similar reasons that were just described in the previous testimony. I think that the main point I want to underline here is when it comes to talking about eviction and tenancy, especially these days when we are living in such a precarious situation in the housing crisis, we're talking about people's housing hanging in the balance and people who are often on the edge of homelessness, especially for marginalized and vulnerable populations, our older community members with disabilities, young people, it goes on. My concern here with this amendment is the standard of care. I believe that in these situations, when we're talking about eviction, because homelessness so often hangs in the balance, these issues need to be approached with a very high standard of care. And I'm concerned to see such an important issue addressed in a non-germane amendment towards the end of the session, and would like to see it handled with the care it deserves. And I think, as we were talking about in the previous testimony, bills like this, I think, often have implications for all tenants and people outside of those cut and dry situations that were described at the top of this hearing. And I'm concerned with the implications that this might have for tenants who would be otherwise made homeless if they're evicted. Everyone facing eviction deserves due process and clear protection from the law, because homelessness hangs in the balance. I would say if the legislature intends to address this issue, I would urge you to give it the care it deserves, and either improve this amendment with input from experts, which it sounds like there's willingness to do, which is excellent, or wait to give it the attention it deserves in a full standalone bill next session. So I urge the committee to address this amendment. I'll take any questions if you have it.
Quick question. So if someone was to make more clear the words unauthorized, is that one of the scary terms?
I think I would defer to the language that Kirsten and her team have been working on.
Sure.
I think that's a good proposal, and I think it addresses the concerns that I have, with the lack of clarity and the lack of due process here.
Okay. Thank you. Seeing no other questions, have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Is it Bashaw?
Yes.
Awesome. Morning, Officer Bashaw.
Good morning, Senator.
Major, I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you, Senator Gannon. Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Major Christopher Bashaw. I am representing the Rockingham County Sheriff's Office as well as the New Hampshire Sheriff's Association and your 10 high elected sheriffs of the state. We just wanted to come forward with some concerns we had with the amendment. Some of them have already been echoed here. One of my major concerns is one of the initial requirements is essentially almost the definition of the criminal trespass statute. So in order to meet the provisions within this, you're almost meeting the criminal trespass statute. And one of the concerns we have is that all law enforcement has the ability to affect the criminal trespass statute. And by essentially underlining this now in another bill that falls more into the civil realm, we think local law enforcement is probably going to be hesitant to do and handle the cases that are clearly criminal trespass. Say somebody went away on the vacation and they came home, their home has been occupied. I know we've seen those videos, and it's incredibly scary as both a landlord and a property owner myself. But we don't want to take away the tools or have local law enforcement become hesitant to use the tools that are already in place. I think currently the criminal trespassing statute is handling probably 99% of these cases, but the ability to have some discretion allows us to work through some of those issues where you may have a landlord or a property owner trying to manipulate the system and essentially bypass the eviction process. We can use a little bit of common sense, that, well, they don't have a lease and we want to remove because they had a falling out, and then the person advocates to us and says, listen, I've been living here for 9 months and I've been trading work for rent. And we're like, okay, you can't bypass the eviction process. You need to go through the courts to handle this. And if the bill were to pass, some of the language, a lot of shalls in there for the sheriffs and some of their requirements. And one of the most concerning with me was the verification process. I mean, some folks did mention it. Essentially, it's putting the onus on the sheriffs to become the judge to declare ownership. So I don't know if that's going to place it, what level of verification is going to take place. Are we going to be taking on the role of title attorneys and doing title searches at the registry of deeds and contacting mortgage companies to make sure that we don't make the wrong decision? And is that really going to cause a delay because the sheriffs are hesitant about taking on and making that ultimate decision? So it could slow down the process for what really falls under a criminal trespass issue. And now it's going into the civil realm and really delaying it for those homeowners. But we do share the concerns of protecting property owners. Those videos that you see online of people losing their houses and having to go through months-long process to retain them. But I think in New Hampshire, we've struck a pretty good balance of protecting the landlord rights. As a landlord myself, I'm a big advocate for that, but also the tenants' rights. But what we don't want is to take away tools that are already in place and kind of, there's a lot of language that would really need to be clarified that I think could be problematic for the sheriffs to enforce. But if the goal is to continue with some version of the amendment, I did grab Senator Bradley very quickly, said, hey, the Sheriff's Association would be more than happy to navigate through the issues that we have to offer up some suggestions. And I know it's a timely issue, but we just want to make sure we don't create legislation or add to legislation that's going to inhibit landowners, property owners, and affect tenants adversely. And I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Senator Shardy.
Good morning, and thank you for your testimony. I just want clarification because ironically enough, I was at a social event 2 weeks ago in Concord, and I met a woman. She was telling me about her neighbor who went out of the country for 3 months, came home, and people were living in her house, and she couldn't get rid of them, even with the local police, and was told that she has to get an attorney.
And this was in New Hampshire?
Yes.
Okay, so, and this is probably one of those outlying cases, which is incredibly problematic. And I think if the amendment maybe made some changes or added some provisions to the criminal trespass statute to help in these situations, because I think a lot of times when anything has a landlord-tenant nexus, a lot of local enforcement is like, oh, that's a civil issue, you better call the sheriff's office. And not realizing that some things need to be handled through the courts, but some absolutely have the authority to be handled at that criminal trespass level. So, you know, for us, if a deputy showed up on scene and they're like, listen, I just came home and this individual has occupied my house while I was gone, and we could reasonably come to that conclusion, we would absolutely remove that person immediately. We wouldn't force them to go through the court process on that.
Well, that's reassuring because imagine you worked your life for your home, and now people are living in it and they won't leave.
Absolutely. No, that it's a terrifying prospect to lose your home like that, or even temporarily lose your home while going through that process. And I think you're seeing with a lot of the negative aspect of, while we haven't necessarily had that problem in New Hampshire, as soon as you see it spiral out of control on social media, some people get the idea to, oh, I'm going to try this in the state. And then you even, on the flip side of the coin, you have law enforcement and be like, wow, can they do that? Do they have to go through the process? They begin to second guess. And that's why I was really concerned with this amendment, because it would really cause them all to second guess what should be clear-cut situations of criminal trespass and then want to drag it through the civil court process.
Thank you very much.
Senator Shanley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Major. Actually, the first note I had at the top of my amendment was have county sheriffs weighed in on this. So thank you for being here. I guess what I'm looking for, I have a question about just clarifying, and I think you did just now, but I want to be super clear. You said that this may inadvertently take away tools at the hands of law enforcement right now. And are you saying that local law enforcement may not respond to certain criminal trespass calls if they believe, in fact, if this were to become law, it would take it out of their hands?
That would be one of my concerns, because the language is almost identical to meet one of the criteria for the criminal trespass law that I think they would be, their local law enforcement gets very hesitant whenever the word civil is interjected anyway. And even though they have the authority, they seem to, well, you should probably call the sheriff's office, and it could be something that is completely not under our exclusive purview or wheelhouse. So they already get a little hesitant. Then I think if you wrap that, the last thing any officer wants to be is the person on social media video improperly evicting somebody from a home. So I think that they would defer back to this. Well, now this language is here, so you're going to have to go through the sheriff's office in that process. And I'd be concerned that would cause delays in a situation where the person should be removed immediately.
Thank you very much.
Seeing no other testimony, thank you, Major. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Representative Rebecca McWilliams. Morning, Representative.
Good morning, Chair Gannon, members of the committee. It's my pleasure to be here. For the record, Representative Rebecca McWilliams from South Concord, representing the South End. I am the author of the underlying bill, and I'm just here to speak to my concerns about the proposed amendment. I think a lot of the things that have already been addressed are very important to flag, specifically the concern about impacting tenants who may not realize that they have rights when the situation arises where the landlord unjustly says, well, we have an oral agreement, but I'm going to renege on it, commit perjury, and kick you out. So someone will lose their housing and have to fight over this with a sheriff as opposed to a court of law. So that really seems like an unintended, unfortunate consequence that could turn out to be a unfortunate tool used by landlords to try to evict tenants who have an oral agreement. So I'm very concerned about that specific targeted piece here. There was a hypothetical mentioned earlier regarding a tenant who is exchanging work for somewhere to stay. And if that's an oral agreement, that could be just a point of contention where a sheriff would have to make the call. And that really isn't something that our system is set up for. We should be doing that in front of a court of law, and there should be attorneys involved. So when someone's housing, which is fundamental, is involved in the disagreement, I really think that this could have unintended consequences for that specific tenant and landlord relationship. In addition, I do have concerns about asking our sheriffs to do civil research, pulling deeds, looking for things on the registry. That's not really something they're set up to do. So that would add additional cost and potentially staff to our sheriff's departments to try to follow the letter of the law on this. I think that's an unnecessary, unneeded consequence. And I am very interested in coming up with a resolution related to the work that's been done in the House. We do have a team that's been working on coming up with something to better address squatting in New Hampshire. And I think that that effort would be very helpful if we were to amend this with language that is a little bit more neutral on the landlord-tenant relationship. So those are my comments, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Representative. I see none. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Elisa Margola.
Chairman Gannon, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Alyssa Margolin. I serve as Director of Housing Action New Hampshire. Our members are those who develop, finance, and manage affordable housing properties, homeless service providers, supportive housing agencies, public housing agencies, and low-income family advocates. We too wanted to express some concerns about the proposed amendment, and also for the record did support the underlying bill. We were also pleased to hear that Senator Bradley is open to working with some of the concerns expressed. As Representative McWilliams just articulated, we know that there is some language that the House is looking at that we at Housing Action New Hampshire can support, that both, I think, does that clarification that the major was just asking for as and addresses some of the issues proposed by New Hampshire Legal Assistance. We do want to say that want to thank the Senate for the interim study vote on 1115, and know that that is not the first time that the Senate has come through on that. This housing crisis in New Hampshire is very severe. Our members are often on the front lines of in working with Granite State families who are really struggling in a very, very hostile market. We're particularly concerned with unintended consequences around homeless families. Homelessness in New Hampshire can look a little different. And often families find themselves doubled up and can think that they have permission to stay with friends and family, and kids are often in school and parents have work. If they're non-tenants and they need to be removed, there should be a clear process to do so. We just want due process and and where criminal trespassing, and I'll have law enforcement be able to do their role and the landlord-tenant process work out in that situation. So we hope a member of this committee will work with those experts and refine this amendment, and move forward with that. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Seeing no questions, thank you very much. Roy Swiker? Good to see you.
Okay, still forget that. Anyway, I've read all the stories about squatting and how terrible it is, how you have to go through 6 months of court to get your place back and everything, and it's really awful. But I really share the concerns of the major, that in effect what this is doing is it's legalizing squatting. It's saying that, no, the police should not show up and throw you out immediately. We should have to go through this process with the sheriff. And, think about it, the woman that was mentioned here, she comes home from being away, she expects to live in her house, and there's people there. She doesn't want to share that house with those strange people for, however long it takes to deal with it. She wants those people gone immediately. Or let's say you live in Philadelphia and you have a summer home in Wolfboro, and you show up at your summer home and there's somebody there. You don't want to share it with them, you want them gone. So I think that we need to, make sure that the, thing about the original, thing is the local police to throw these people out if they're occupying a place where you live. I mean, that's quite different if it's your summer home and you expect them to spend the weekend there, or it's your house where you live as compared to some rental unit you have. And maybe that's what has to be done, is some, bifurcation of these two things. And when I originally read about the squatting stuff, I say, well, that would never happen in New Hampshire, because number one, I would call the local police and have them toss the person. And number two, in New Hampshire, if I'm threatened by somebody in my home, I can shoot them. And the problem with this process here is that it's unduly bureaucratic. Like the major said, it tends to keep people from, doing their job in the local level and involving the sheriff. It says the sheriff will remove them immediately. Well, I don't know if you've dealt with the sheriff's office, but I think in Merrimack County, if I wanted to do it first off, I'd have to show up in Boscawen between 8 and 4 on weekdays to, file the paper with them. So if it's happening on a weekend or at night or whatever, I couldn't do it. And then the sheriff's got to investigate, who may or may not know how to work the registry of deeds, who it is. So it could be days or weeks, or once again, someone's living in my house. Where am I supposed to be living, in the meantime? We need to have, a process that if it says the sheriff does it immediately, it means within an hour. It doesn't mean, after the next Monday, after he researches this stuff. We need those people gone. Because I will tell you that if I was faced with this, if I show up and someone in my house and the local police said, oh, we can't handle it now, it's the sheriff, it would be cheaper for me to go out and buy a gun and shoot those trespassers than it would be to go through this process with the sheriff. And once again, if you'll give me your indulgence for another minute, as far as the original bill, I was very unhappy to see this tacked onto the original bill, because I was hoping you'd kill the original bill. The original bill is not a good bill. It's substituting the judgment of people in the legislature for local planning commissions who know what their problems are. I'm a great believer in walkable neighborhoods. I probably walk 80% of the time when I leave my property as compared to driving. And I walked to this hearing. I wonder how many of these other people that think this underlying bill is great can say they walked here. But it's getting harder to walk in the city because there aren't enough parking spaces. People have more cars and not less. One Sunday morning, I got up, there was 3 different properties. People were parked on the sidewalk. It's supposed to be walkable if people are parking on the sidewalk overnight because there's not enough parking spaces. So we not only need to, refer the amendment to interim study and, bifurcate the issue of a, tenant property with a property you actually live in, but also we need to kill the original bill, or at least, give some reasonable number. When someone said, well, it's unreasonable, they require 5 parking spaces per unit. Well, maybe that's unreasonable. But requiring 2 or 1 per bedroom is not unreasonable. We should not limit it to 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing no questions, have a good day. Rep. Tom Walsh. Does anyone else wish to testify who might not have checked off speaking? Seeing none, I'm about to close the hearing. No one else wants to go? Thank you.
You're welcome. For this one, he's not here today, so Representative McAleer is going to introduce it.
Awesome. Representative McAleer. Who's he? So that's coming from back. Okay.
Mr. Chair, the representative.
You're introducing it, Representative? I'll punch us in. I'm opening the hearing for 1320, an act relative to real property and flood risk disclosure. Representative McAleer?
Yes, thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Chris McAleer. I'm the representative for Carroll County District 2, which is the northern towns of Carroll County. Thank you for having me here. I'm actually here for Chris Munns, and he gave me his talk, which I think he sent to you. If you don't have it, I've got copies here for you. But he asked me to read this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. My name is Chris Munns, which it is not, and I am one of the 4 representatives representing the town of Hampton in Rockingham District 29. I'm also the prime sponsor of HB 1320. I'm sorry I can't be with you. Unfortunately, I had to fly to Michigan to tend to some unavoidable family matters. I would like to thank my colleague, Representative Chris McAleer, that is me, agreeing to introduce this bill to you on my behalf. The version of HB 1320 we passed in the House and that you have before you is quite different than the version I introduced. Originally, it required more robust disclosure of flooding risk, not only by sellers of property, but landlords as well. That approach was not acceptable to most of the members of the House Commerce Committee, but after working closely with the chairman of that committee, the New Hampshire Association of Realtors, and the New Hampshire Rental Property Owners Association, we are able to settle on language before you, which I fully support and hope you will recommend as ought to pass to your colleagues in the Senate. Representative McAleer was very involved in those discussions, and at the risk of putting him on the spot, can answer your questions. Just within the last year, we've seen unprecedented amounts of flooding in our state, not just on the seacoast, but in communities in the White Mountains, Lakes region, and Monadnock region during June and July of last year. This flooding not only resulted in millions of dollars of damages, but disrupted the lives of thousands of our fellow citizens. Sadly, many of them are probably taken by surprise. They had no idea they lived in or near a flood zone. That is what this bill is attempting to address. In 2020, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, estimated that 29,000 properties in New Hampshire were at substantial risk of damage from flooding. At present, first-time buyers learned that the property that they want to purchase is in a flood zone when they apply for a mortgage. Since flood insurance is expensive and becoming more so, this often makes it more difficult or impossible for the prospective buyer to afford the resulting higher than expected monthly mortgage, property tax, and insurance payments, and they end up having to back out of a transaction they had invested significant time, money, and energy in. Committing to purchase property is one of the largest financial investments any individual will make in their lifetime. This bill ensures that prospective purchasers of property in New Hampshire understand the properties in coastal areas and along waterways may be subject to increased risk of flooding over time. And further, it ensures that buyers understand that a standard homeowner's insurance policy typically does not cover flood damage. Finally, the bill encourages the buyer to determine whether separate flood insurance is required and consult the Federal Emergency Management Agency, again FEMA, at FEMA.gov, to determine if the property is in a designated flood zone. This language will be included in the standard purchase and sales agreement used in all New Hampshire real estate transactions, with both the seller and purchaser are required to sign. There's little we can do when flooding occurs. Luckily, there is a growing amount of readily available information about where the greatest risks of flooding are. It is important that prospective buyers do their own due diligence, but it is also incumbent upon the owner of the property to share all the available information they have about the property as part of the transaction they're about to enter into. The legislature has given certainly that there should be the case with respect to disclosures about radon, arsenic, and lead. Given the devastation we have seen from flooding, now is the time to add disclosure of potential flood risk to that list. I urge you to recommend HB 1320 ought to pass. Thank you for your time. And once again, my apologies for not being able to be with you. Any questions?
The bill seems crystal clear. How about you guys? We are great. Thank you very much.
All
for
right, thank you,
testimony.
sir.
Great job. Chris Norwood. Morning, Chris.
Good morning, Senator. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Chris Norwood. I'm the 2024 Chair for the New Hampshire Association of Realtors Public Policy Committee and our 7,000 members. I'm also a licensee and practicing in the field. So I just want to give a little context. Originally, we did oppose this bill, and as Representative mentioned, we worked with the sponsor on this amendment. The first section of the amendment, we certainly are fully supportive of. That is adding the flood on page 1, lines 26 through 30. Just, I guess, a minor note of caution. RSA 477 is where all the affirmative disclosures go, whether it's A, B, C, or D. They're different disclosures. This legislative session, we have this disclosure coming in. There's a PFAS disclosure, and there's also a contemplated disclosure for septic capacity for restaurants. At some level, we may be not over disclosing. That sounds bad. These disclosures may just kind of breeze through people. They sign it, and there's just too much data. I don't think we're there yet. Just a note of caution. What we have more concern about is on the second page, bold lines 7 and 8. Just if I could, the language information relative to the property's location within a flood zone, we're not 100% sure what that means. Does it mean that the property's in the northeast corner of the 100-year flood? Or again, just not 100% sure what that means. Our existing language on the form reads, is this property located in federally designated flood hazard zone? We think that that's a clearer statement than information relative to the property's location within a flood zone. So just some ambiguity there. The second part going into line 8 is perhaps where we do have a greater concern. This is where the seller has to notify the buyer if the seller has flood insurance. So just to backtrack a little bit, flood insurance is really a mandate from the lender. And so if someone owns their property free and clear or had a cash acquisition, they may not have flood insurance, even though they should otherwise have it. So having a seller disclose to a buyer, no, I do not have flood insurance, could give the buyer a false sense of expectation. And since we're already having these other disclosures within the bill, we think that adding in that disclosure of the seller, again, it could create a false negative expectation on the buyer's behalf. So overall, we're supportive of the bill, and we thank the sponsor for the amendments they've made, but would just ask if there could be those final tweaks to lines 7 and 8 on page 2, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Seeing none. Have a great day.
Thank you, Senator.
Chris McAleer. Oh, that's you. I'm already, yeah. I'm thinking you're Munns, but I got it down. So we are all set. Does anyone else wish to testify on 1320? Seeing none. Thank you. Ooh, longer than I thought. That's most unfortunate. Aaron, is Rep Power here? Here. Come on down. We're going to open HB 1187, an act relative to prohibiting lease agreements of equipment for the building or facility improvements. Representative Power, good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and honorable committee members. I feel like a ping pong ball today because I'm double booked and I just have been running back and forth between election law
I
and
had
this
6
committee.
last
So,
week, 6 in a row next door, so I feel your pain.
yeah. As a prime sponsor, I appreciate the opportunity to introduce to you today House Bill 1187. For the record, I am Representative Diane Power, and I represent the towns of Brookline, Mason, and Greenville in Hillsborough County District 36. I also serve as the Vice Chairman of the House Municipal and County Government Committee. To begin, this bill is a simple, straightforward bill that was filed upon the request of a number of citizens due to the widespread misuse of the RSA for lease agreements of equipment. This bill passed the House on the consent calendar with a unanimous committee recommendation of ought to pass as amended. The purpose of this bill is to end the misuse of lease agreements of equipment with escape clauses by closing a loophole in RSA 33(7)E that's being inappropriately used to fund major facilities improvements and renovations around leases of equipment. Under current law, towns and school districts can propose extremely high-cost, long-term lease agreements with non-appropriation or escape clauses on their warrants. The problem addressed by this bill is a loophole in RSA 33(7) that allows for fixed items to be leased, such as building materials like framing, drywall, insulation, flooring, doors, windows, electrical, lighting, HVAC, etc. Ask yourself, how can these fixed and installed building materials be returned under an escape clause? It's also important to note that a simple majority vote is all that's needed to approve such an article. This is a serious problem that needs to be addressed. Based on my research, I have found 17 examples of school districts misusing the lease agreements of equipment statute, which I've provided to you for your reference via email, and I also have copies back there. So, for example, in my own district in 2022, the Brookline School District put forward a warrant article for an 18-year lease agreement with an escape clause totaling $2.5 million for energy conservation equipment, an elevator, security improvements, as well as classroom renovations. Earlier this year, the Thornton School District put forth a 20-year lease agreement with an escape clause for a boiler room replacement at a cost of $4.4 million. And the most egregious misuse of the lease agreements of equipment that I found was in 2023, in which the Timberlane Regional School District placed on their warrant an article to fund a 20-year lease agreement totaling $25.2 million for facilities repairs and maintenance. Stop and ask yourself, how is a lease agreement with an escape clause even practical in any of these cases? And how could you even escape a leased renovation? It's clear that projects of such scope and magnitude should not only be bonded, but they should also require a 3/5 supermajority vote, and a ballot vote, not just a simple majority vote. Moreover, lease agreements end up costing the taxpayers more money than bonds, because the interest rates for leases are almost always higher than bond rates, and this is not fiscally responsible to the taxpayers. To conclude, This bill prevents building improvements and renovations that are fixed items to be financed through lease agreements of equipment. Therefore, I respectfully ask this committee to recommend to pass on 1187 to bring an end to the misuse of the lease agreements of equipment statute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my bill introduction.
Thank you very much, Senator Shardy.
Good morning, nice to see you. My question is, would this legislative policy change prohibit any type of energy efficiency projects from moving forward if they follow the state statute and they go through the process approved by the voters?
To repeat the question, you're asking me if the bill proposal would prohibit any
energy projects from moving forward?
It would depend on when this bill becomes, if it was signed into law, when it becomes effective. And in general, thereafter, I would say no. Just follow the appropriate process.
And have it go before the voters and have them approve?
Correct.
Okay. And one other follow-up. Are energy projects typically planned purchases part of a capital improvements plan so that the towns and the schools know in advance that there are large planned purchases that are necessary?
Thank you for the question, Senator. So unfortunately, and the answer would be yes, that people, the town does know about it, but the point of this bill is it's the misuse. This is not anything to do with energy, savings measures that a political subdivision might like to engage in. This has to do with the issue of the vehicle by which such a project is undertaken. And as I laid out very clearly, the use of lease agreements with escape clauses is not best practice, according to my understanding. That's not municipal best practices. That's number one. And number two, it's clearly a misuse. It's a misuse when, and I don't understand why the question is simply focused on energy, but it's a misuse of this statute in order to fund a project, regardless of what the nature of the project is. Millions of dollars being funded and dollars being raised and appropriated through a lease agreement with an escape clause, as I laid out, really makes no sense. And it's incumbent upon the legislature to address this issue.
So the reason I brought up the questions about the energy is I understand the intent of the bill, and I understand it's to close the loophole for misuse. But so many people reached out having concerns that it would change their ability to have energy provided. So I asked those questions so that we could make it clear for anyone listening that this would have no impact on their ability to have energy projects.
Thank you, Senator. I would absolutely agree with that. That's such projects can still be proposed, and they still can go on the warrant, and the monies can be raised and appropriated. In no way, shape, or means will it, with this bill, affect the ability to undertake such projects.
Thank you for taking my questions.
Senator Shanley, you're good. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Kristen Koch. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kirsten Koch, and I am the Vice President of Public Policy for the Business and Industry Association, known as BIA, and we serve as a statewide chamber of commerce. We are here today in opposition to House Bill 1187. We believe there's some serious unintended consequences for energy efficiency as well as for business. We oppose this bill for three reasons. One, it removes an important tool for municipalities' toolbox 2, reduces energy efficiency opportunities in New Hampshire. And 3, if passed, the consequences would be detrimental to local energy efficiency employers. This would put them out of business. This bill would delete a provision that has already been in statute for over 10 years. It protects the opportunity for municipalities to utilize leases, and that the leases allow them to reasonably pay for otherwise unobtainable facility improvements that they can't pay for the upfront costs on. We completely acknowledge that there are concerns about municipalities potentially misusing lease options. However, this bill as currently drafted will decrease the reliability of the local energy grid and will put local employers out of business. We feel that this bill does not address the crux of the problem, right? The crux is misuse. It's not leasing. Leasing can still be an option. The problem is the municipalities are misusing it. If passed, what's most concerning about this bill is that municipalities who cannot pay the entire cost of a project upfront will have to forego energy efficiency projects to their facilities and improvements entirely. Consequently, that puts energy efficiency contractors out of business and takes away local jobs. In recent years, energy efficiency industry has battled for regulatory certainty to defend their industry. You may have heard already about all the bipartisan efforts to protect energy efficiency in the last few years. And this bill would decimate the work of the legislature and a variety of stakeholders that have worked on this energy efficiency. This bill inhibits the opportunity for New Hampshire to be more energy efficient. The state's 10-year energy strategy, which is produced by the New Hampshire Department of Energy, states that energy efficiency is often the cheapest and cleanest resource, and New Hampshire should prioritize capturing cost-effective energy efficiency in all sectors, including buildings. Supporting energy efficiency has been a top priority for the BIA, and so we are very concerned with this bill. We respectfully ask the committee to refer this bill to interim study. We believe this proposal needs more time to resolve the actual problem at hand without taking away tools from municipalities and devastating local businesses that provide important services to our communities. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Senator.
Good morning. Nice to see you. Thank you for your testimony, and I applaud the BIA for wanting to have energy efficiency across the board. But the reason I had asked those specific questions to Representative is that this really doesn't. Let me first say, I'm putting my former town councilor hat back on. This really would not be tying the hands of any municipality or school wanting to be energy efficient. All it is seeming to do in this bill is clean up the statute so that there will not be misuse. You will still be able to proceed, but in a way that is appropriate.
Thank you, Senator. Well, I would say I don't believe that's true, and that's because municipalities often use leases to pay for these projects. That's the only way that they can afford them or get these projects approved because it's not a large upfront cost. And so with that being the only way that it's financially viable to make these improvements to their facilities, if they lose that option, then they can't be energy efficient anymore because they can't afford to.
Well, I believe that the intent is they would still be able to lease. It's just that it would go before the people and have due process.
And we're not asking for it to not have process, but we want the option to have a lease available.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Catherine Heck.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Catherine Heck. I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association. I'm not often before your committee here today, so thank you for allowing me some time to speak. The reason I chose to speak is to make sure I could answer any questions that you might have. As this bill was originally filed and went through the House process, we worked with the sponsor for a very long time, going through every little detail to ensure that this would not impact any ability to do any type of leasing project, but it would correct and fix some concerns that have been brought forward. As you've heard from the testimony, that So the original bill was quite a few pages long, and it was a very different bill. And again, working with the sponsor, we were able to craft something that allows the most possible flexibility to our municipalities to enter into those equipment lease agreements. But let's go to the statute itself, RSA 33.7, and what it is. The RSA itself is about leasing of equipment. Equipment maybe could be defined as, perhaps you think of a cruiser, a fire truck, a generator. It could be a ground mount solar piece of equipment. There could be lots of things that a municipality might want to lease. What this statute allows is the governing body to enter into a lease agreement. At different times of the year, maybe our police cruiser, we know it's going to be up for its regular replacement schedule. It doesn't follow the town meeting process. Our governing body is therefore able to lease that piece of equipment as it needs to with a non-appropriation clause. So municipalities are set up to do business 1 year at a time. So being as such, anytime we lease a piece of equipment for more than 1 year, maybe it's a 5-year lease, a 7-year lease, you've heard some examples of longer leases, that piece of equipment is set up so that we have to place it either on the warrant afterwards or in the annual budget and have it be approved by the voters so we continue to make those annual payments. What a non-appropriation clause is, would allow the lessor to physically take back the piece of equipment that is not a fixture. They can physically pick it up, take it back if it's not funded, and resell it, do whatever they wish with it. So what the problem that is being trying to address and the work that we've done here is that anything that becomes a facility improvement that becomes a fixture. We cannot lease a window, a door, a boiler. It does not meet the standard set forth in law in the Supreme Court decision, New England Telephone versus Telco in the city of Franklin from 1996, right? So we know that we have defined what a fixture is, and we also use this in our tax statutes for taxing real property. Now, of course, municipalities and schools don't pay property tax, but we do have valuations. So we are not going to be able to take back a boiler, a window, a roof, right? So it does not preclude any type of project from occurring that can physically go through the proper leasing process and be picked up and taken back and done whatever the leasing company wants to do. The statute also already requires any piece of equipment that's over $100,000 in value or any project to go before the voters and have a 2/3 majority vote. So I do think that we want flexibility to do our energy efficient projects, but something like an elevator, we can't take it back once we've put it in the building. I don't see how that would work practically, and it's not consistent with any advice that we're giving our members when they move forward with these lease agreements. So we do not believe that this would stop any energy efficiency project from happening if it doesn't become a permanent fixture. And again, the law already defines equipment versus fixture. So that's a whole nother aspect to this that's not being considered that you might want to deliberate as you're deciding how this bill moves forward. So I'm certainly happy to take any questions.
Good morning, nice to see you. So just to be clear, this is I'm going to use the word a housekeeping bill to a degree to fix this loophole. It would in no way impact any energy efficient businesses, any small businesses from continuing to do business, or municipalities from having leases. Is that correct?
That is correct. If you want to do a lease purchase for something that's going to become a fixture, you would have to still go through the proper town meeting process. And as long as the voters approve it, it does not preclude them from moving forward with those important projects. So there's a lease purchase, which you could do for a grader, a fire truck, solar. There's so many areas that's a lease purchase can be appropriate. But if it becomes a fixture, right, then that purpose really, especially if we're talking it's $20 million, really is long-term debt and has to go through the bond process. That's supported in Chapter 33 of municipal statutes. So we're trying to balance the flexibility that's needed to move forward with these projects with government finance and the laws and rules in which we operate by in the state.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Seeing no other questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lori Lane. Morning, Superintendent. How you doing? Is your light on? I'm sorry. Yeah, there you go.
So it's red, so we're good? Okay, awesome, thank you. My name is Lori Lane, and I live in the city of Rochester. As a former school superintendent, I am asking you to oppose HB 1187. HB 1187 seeks to amend RSA 33:7-E, which currently allows the governing body, and in my case, this local school board, the authority to enter into lease agreements for equipment, including building and facilities improvements. The bill, as amended by the House, changes the language in the RSA to no longer allow equipment that becomes fixtures, quote unquote, to be financed by a lease agreement. That phrase, that becomes fixtures, is undefined in the language and is confusing as governing bodies try to determine exactly what kind of equipment can or cannot be funded by a lease agreement. I'm further asking you to oppose HB 1187 because it is unclear why the legislature would want to tell school boards and communities how to fund improvements in their schools. Lease agreements allow school districts another option besides raising taxes and taking out long-term bonds to fund projects to keep their school buildings safe for learning and working. Depending on the scope of the project, lease agreements can be cost neutral for school districts. For example, when I worked at SAU 56 in Somersworth, the school board approved entering into 2 different cost-neutral projects. In 2019, 19 classroom unit ventilators in one school were replaced with a ducted HVAC system, significantly improving the building's air quality for students and staff. In 2020, lighting fixtures were replaced in all 4 of the district schools, and an inefficient boiler plant in one building was also replaced. The energy savings from these projects entirely offset the cost of the annual lease payments. So additionally, the benefits of lease agreements are that, unlike a bond, they are flexible and can be paid off early should the school board wish to do so. They contain an escape clause allowing the district to exit the lease without penalty. Leases can be refinanced as rates drop. Leases can be structured to match energy savings, creating cost-neutral impacts on school budgets. In closing, school boards have many challenges as they look for ways to manage the rising costs of aging and energy-inefficient buildings. Losing the lease agreement option would significantly hamper school districts' ability to address aging infrastructure cost-effectively. I ask that you oppose HB 1187. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you very much. Seeing no questions, have a great day. Thanks for coming. Adam Schmidt, would you give me a coffee? Coffee. Yeah. Thank you very much. Bill Baber. Doesn't have to be Starbucks. It's okay.
Morning, Mr. Chair, Senators. Appreciate the time to speak to you. I am Bill Baber. I'm from Dover and chair of the Dover Energy Commission. Dover Energy Commission is strongly opposed to this bill. I will try and revise my remarks to not duplicate the prior 2 speakers in the BIA and the superintendent. But leases are an attractive way for some communities at some times for some projects to finance things that they could not do otherwise for energy efficiency. If you look at the 10 goals of the state energy strategy, they all are, each goal can be addressed by energy efficiency and usually most effectively by energy efficiency. But city departments, town departments frequently have their own budgets. And the last thing, they're always under stress, as you well know. Making capital expenditures is sometimes extremely difficult to fit into alternatives like trying to hire another snowplow driver. So one of the things that has been made available through some lease arrangements are guaranteed programs where the lease guarantees that it's going to more than pay for itself through the energy efficiency program itself. So our basic issue, and it's pretty clear in the language that any lease that is a fixture, and I can't for the life of me think of a single energy efficient undertaking that we would do that would not become a fixture, cannot be leased, period. And I think what we would like to see is the bill, put on interim study or ITL and reviewed so that they're actually, it went through the House without any real input from the community that is trying to implement energy efficiency, or, the contractors are doing this work. And we would like to see that, have the opportunity to fully express the concerns and the impacts it would have to the state's energy efficiency goals, programs, and employees. Thank you very much.
Yeah, yes.
Good morning, nice to see you. I have a question.
Sorry.
So this is about a non-appropriation clause. So for a fixed situation like the Havoc system, you can't give that back. What I'm trying to say is this is about leasing. Okay, so you can still lease and do all of the energy, but when you lease something, you lease it. You don't keep it, like a door, a window, a Havoc system. So that's only part of this bill, is the non-appropriation clause. And am I understanding that correctly?
I don't, my understanding is if you wanted to lease something for energy efficiency that was a fixture, you could not do it. It's that language is pretty simple and clear, and I think that that's part of the problem. I think the language is perhaps too simple and does not respond to give the options to municipalities. I mean, we have accountants, financial officers, elected officials that all have financial backgrounds, and they're not going to pick the option that is not the most attractive for the city to undertake. And I think that what we're saying is we would like you not to take this option away from the 270 communities in our state and allow them to make the best choices that they can, because doing energy efficiency is critical. It saves money, it saves greenhouse gases, it employs local individuals, and generally they're wise capital investments. So, given the way the law is currently, the bill is currently proposed, I think that would not be possible.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. I have a question, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but I think that I heard that some of the people who testified prior to your testimony, I think that I heard people say that these projects should be bonded, that they'd be less expensive, that bonding is the appropriate way to fund them, and that to not lease would save taxpayer dollars. I put to you, do you believe that that is the case?
I do not, and I think one of the things that's possible under particularly if you're trying to address lots of issues in energy efficiency, relatively small projects, and you can do it, under a broad lease arrangement with a competent company that can come in and do item by item, contract by contract, and you can decide whether or not that makes more sense for that department, for that purchase. Maybe it's a few $1,000s that does any other way. But most of all, you can get implemented quicker. And that's I think, our biggest goal. Is we have the city of Dover has set a goal to get net zero by 2035. And this is one of the things that we were counting on, using a program like this to be able to do that. I think I didn't answer one of your questions.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. Michael Davey. Morning, Mr. Davey.
My name is Michael Davey, and I'm a partner in Energy Efficient Investments, which is a Merrimack, New Hampshire-based energy efficiency company that employs 72 employees, and we're the largest energy service provider in the state of New Hampshire. Leasing is by far and away the most popular vehicle for these types of projects. And if this bill were to pass, it would be devastating for the energy efficiency industry across the state. It's elected officials that are entering into these lease agreements when they've been done successfully, and they've been voted on by the legislative body. One good example of this is in Conant High School in Jaffrey, where they had a failing oil boiler system, and it was extremely inefficient. We brought forward an option to do a lease purchase to convert them to local wood fuel heat. And we reduced energy operating expenses by $200,000 in Jaffrey. The project, they considered a bond, they considered a lease, and they found that leasing was the best option because it could be married to the energy savings. So bonds are very restrictive, and that you have higher upfront payments. These leases are tax exempt. So Bank of America, Bank of New Hampshire can lease this to at rates very comparable to bonding. We saw 2 years ago Sunapee get 1.89% to do a local wood chip heating. And they didn't feel that bonding was the best option for these communities. They felt that the supermajority requirement to switch out the boiler that's paid for by energy savings didn't make sense. And leases can be paid off early. So if the savings exceed the lease payments, just like with your mortgage payments at home, you can increase the payment and pay it off early. You can refinance. And one of the questions was, is the bank going to repossess the boiler? No. But when a scenario happens like a school district redistricts or closes, as we've seen Franklin, for example, closed a school, then you can very easily get out of that payment either by breaking the lease contract or by selling the property and dissolving that lease. So the tax exempt lease is something that can be, with the escape clause, allows municipalities, if they redistrict, if they shrink their school size, to easily get out of that, whereas bond debt needs to be carried full term at that full rate. So leasing is extremely popular. It's used in all 50 states. It's used by the federal government. And the corrective action wasn't really to correct a problem. I know of no problem where banks came and took windows out of a school or took their boiler out. The real one of the goals of this was to apply the 2/3 majority threshold to a boiler replacement, which I think is no other state that we work in do you need a 2/3 majority to replace a boiler.
Natasha, I'm not going to destroy your last name. How do you say your last name?
Shaw.
Okay.
And I apologize.
I was going to take a shot.
My handwriting is probably kindergarten worthy. Thank you for allowing me to testify. My name is Natasha Shaw, and I represent the National Association of Energy Service Companies to oppose House Bill 1187. So we're the leading trade organization for the energy services industry. And I want to not reiterate what was already stated, but just to make a couple of key points. So our industry's done over $70 billion in this space, and many across the country are done with lease agreements. Many of them are tax exempt lease agreements, and they usually are done without the cumbersome approvals of a 2/3 vote. And to Michael Davies' point earlier, looking at treating this almost like a bond is not fruitful for the municipalities to get critical infrastructure. There's just one other point I want to make sure everyone understands. These projects are not funded with capital contributions. They're funded through energy savings. So we basically are able to reduce a utility bill, and then from there, use that money to fund a project over a term. And the lease agreements allow us to do that. There's statute in place to support that and allows the flexibility to do that. So we urge the committee to focus on, I understand the concern about misuse of lease agreements, but that's not really what's addressed in this bill. So I hope you guys take into consideration that the municipalities need this critical infrastructure upgrades. And the fact that we're not paying out of taxpayer dollars is critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Shanley, I saw your mic. No, okay. Thank you very much. Catherine Heck, could you come back up?
Yes, of course. Happy to be here, sir. What can I qualify for you?
I'm sorry. So my understanding of the bill was it doesn't prevent leasing, but the testimony I'm hearing from so many others are that it will, and that they have concerns about their businesses or not being able to lease. Is there a way you can clarify this? I'm hearing basically two different things here.
So I can understand and appreciate that. And I think the reason for that is we have an industry and how it operates, and then we have New Hampshire's municipal budget law, right? And those two things don't seem to be talking to each other throughout this conversation. This bill does not prevent anyone from entering into a lease purchase. This is about the non-appropriation clause piece. So our governments, by the laws that you write, and dozens of statutes, RSA 32 and RSA 33, are how we are dictated in which we will present an annual budget. As you know, as a counselor, former counselor, all our appropriations lapse at year end. We operate 1 year at a time. We can only spend, whether it's a lease, a purchase, taxation, we can only spend, it doesn't matter where the dollars are coming from, even if it's an energy neutral, what the legislative body allows us to spend. Our appropriations, right? You approve a budget for $1 million. It doesn't matter what we do through the middle of the year. We cannot expend more than the $1 million you've approved despite revenues. Revenues and expenditures and municipal budgeting do not speak to each other except for when we are presenting a budget and we're looking at estimated tax impact and when we set the tax rate, only at those two times. So a lease with a non-appropriation clause is very different from a lease purchase agreement that can still go through the regular process. It can still be approved by the voters and the legislative body. If you're a city, it's going to be a different process, and move forward. Once a lease purchase is approved without a municipal appropriation clause, that is long-term debt. It's a long-term obligation, but municipalities are prohibited in dozens of other chapter law from entering into any multi-year agreement without the voter's permission. The non-appropriation clause allows a voter, the RSA requires that we disclose the line item detail of the budget at the public hearing and at the town meeting. Any voter can delete, zero out a line if that line is a non-appropriation clause for the lease purchase of whatever item it is, a fire, whatever it is. No means no is triggered. That means we cannot pay for that if that's what the town meeting voted on. So therefore, if it is a fixture, then now we get into the law. So we get into case law, and I have dozens of cases if we want to get into case law on this. Now we get into that, whether it's a fixture or whether it's a piece of equipment. Can we pick it up and take it back? So we do have some considerations that if we have a non-appropriation clause and it is put into the budget, it can still be zeroed out by the annual town meeting or the deliberative session and not funded in the future year. That's why we would not recommend something like a window or a door be put into a non-appropriation clause, because you run the risk of no means no, and there's nothing anyone can do because that is the law. So I think there's some competing things here. This is not anything so industries can't move forward with important business. We support energy efficiency and energy efficiency projects, 100%. But there's a huge difference between a lease purchase with or without the non-appropriation clause, and a town can absolutely enter into a lease agreement without a non-appropriation clause for future years. Any future contract has to be Sanbornized, right? That's another legal term, by the annual meeting in order for that multi-year contract to be valid. So we have some competing pieces in the law here that we're trying to work out. But I think there's a misunderstanding on how our system works on the municipal side and on the school side. We follow the same laws. I'm also a member of a school board, so I understand how this works on both sides. So we're not trying to preclude anything from occurring or moving forward. It just has to go through a bit of a different process. And if it's probably a $20 million project, that long-term debt probably does have to go through the bond process. And it still can be revenue neutral. It still can be revenue neutral. But again, our revenues and expenditures don't talk to each other, right? We get the voters to approve a budget over here, and we have to have everything, we have to gross appropriate in New Hampshire, which means every single item that we are going to spend money on has to be approved. Otherwise, we cannot spend money for that purpose if we don't have a line for it. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with these laws because they're the laws that you write. We are Dillon's rule state, not a home rule state. So we are trying to work with everybody here to make sure that the law can be as flexible as possible, still move forward with any of the projects that people would like to move forward with while addressing a different concern that has been brought forward.
Because I wouldn't want the hands tied of people, school, whether it's a school or a town, to not become more energy efficient and have these leases. So I just want to be clear that they can still do that, even with this bill.
Correct.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Very well.
Hi, good morning. I'm Carrie Worms with EEI, with Energy Efficient Investments. I'm Director of Business Development for Maine and New Hampshire EEI. We have done a lot of projects throughout the state in the performance contracting. One included would be the $7 million project that we just did with Nashua Schools that had a non-appropriation clause that their lawyers approved. These mechanisms allow the school board and the elected officials of those communities and municipalities to make the best use of that money for their taxpayers and saying we are going to put forth a tax-exempt lease purchase to do energy efficient upgrades in the community. So I did want to say that that has been approved through the lawyer from Nashua. Thank you.
Pichet. Good morning. Thanks for having me. I'm Renee Pichet with Municipal Leasing Consultants. My notes here. Okay. Sorry. So we've been doing tax exempt lease, which is called TELP financing, for over 35 years. We work with banks throughout the United States and local community banks and attorneys here in New Hampshire who, along with the municipalities governing body, approve the project and the financing. The industry started 45 years ago for a financing alternative for essential equipment and projects with a volume in 2023 of $10 billion and $65 million in New Hampshire, with the state of New Hampshire, counties, schools, and towns comprising those projects. The energy statute in every state incorporates TELP financing as the preferred financing vehicle because the payments are paid from the savings in the utility budget, which typically are guaranteed savings by the vendor, the ESCO, the Energy Services Company. So the payment structure are either neutral or positive cash flow for the period of the term of the financing. The New Hampshire statute for performance contracts, which has been in existence since 1993, includes a non-appropriation clause, which is standard in all TELP financings. Municipalities, schools, and counties would lose a lot of flexibility to finance necessary improvements for critical infrastructure that will help them save money and be more energy efficient. I do want to address a couple of points that were made. The escape clause that has been mentioned, the annual appropriation clause, in the 45 years that this industry has been in existence, the instances of non-appropriation are less than 0.1% because of the fact no municipalities are entering into these contracts, whether it's a school bus, a fire truck, or an energy efficiency project, to not appropriate. These are essential projects for these municipalities. Also, if there was a non-appropriation, the bank and the ESCO or the vendor, whoever is providing the equipment, would work with the municipality to resolve that because none of the banks that are in this industry would want any of this equipment back. Remember, this is a tax-exempt lease purchase financing, so the banks get the same interest rates as they would a bond. The bond may be more expensive because the bond includes issuance costs that the lease purchase financing doesn't. As mentioned, the term of the financing is tailored to the useful life of the equipment. So, you don't want to throw police cars or lighting project into a 20-year bond. So this financing is very, as mentioned before, very flexible. The interest rates, as I mentioned, are comparable because the banks don't care if they're buying a tax-exempt bond or a lease. So that's a misconception. Also about the taking the equipment back. That's never, I've been doing it 38 years. It's been done maybe one time or a few times in the history of it. So, no one in this industry is looking to misuse this type of financing. Like I mentioned, it's primarily was formed for essential use equipment, but I also wanted to make that recently the federal government released the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides tax credits for energy projects, which will become effective May 10th of 2024. Those tax credits will be financed primarily through tax-exempt lease purchase financings for all types of energy projects, whether they be renewable, electric vehicles. So by taking this type of financing away from, the state, it's, like I said, it's used in every state throughout the country. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Do you have questions?
Okay, thanks.
Good morning. Good morning, Senators. Thank you for having me. For the record, my name is Eric Power. I'm from the town of Brookline. I formerly served on our cooperative school board with Hollis Brookline School District for 3 years, and I'm in my 4th year currently serving on the Brookline Planning Board. And I think about this lease purchase agreement, I think you've heard and gotten examples of at least 17 examples from school districts that most people would look at it and say they think they've misused this RSA. And this RSA was essentially developed, legislative intent was to do leases of big vehicles and other types of big equipment that you could easily return. That's why they would have an escape clause. For example, a $600,000 fire truck. And maybe you do a 5-year or a 10-year lease on it, but if you get into year 5 and you want to return it, it's easy. You drive it in and turn it in and you're done. The problem is that this has been with the language that was in there that allows you to have facility improvements with these leases. It's been a little bit of equipment, and then the people have been justifying gigantic leases. Most notably is one that happened in the Timberlane School District just 2 years ago. For those who, I feel bad for the taxpayers in Timberlane, but they passed that by a 55% majority, so it got the simple majority, and they are leasing a over $25 million lease over 20 years. That certainly looks like a bond to me, not like a lease, because while there is some equipment in there, there's a lot of other fixtures, if you will. You can't return a 2x4, and you can't return a window, and you can't return an elevator. So really the wrong vehicle was used, and what's been happening primarily is this lease purchase agreement, from my point of view, is being used because to approve that, if you have an escape agreement, it only needs a simple majority to pass the legislative body. And as a matter of fact, if you're SB2 town, it would be a ballot vote because you do the ballot with SB2. But if you have a traditional meeting, it can actually just be a simple card vote to spend $25 million. I don't think that's right. There needs to be consensus when you're making these long, multi-year commitments. And to say you can escape is sort of a false argument, in my opinion. You're not going to ever escape it. You've heard that escapes are almost never happening. So for all intents and purposes, you're making that commitment, but you're not going the bond route because you are the school boards and governing boards want the legislative body to approve it at the simple majority level, And I've heard today people talk about 2/3. That used to be the majority for a bond. It is currently 3/5, as you probably know, both in SB2 towns and traditional towns. So it is actually a 60% supermajority to approve a bond. And the thing that's sad about it is that in the case of like Timberlane, they did this lease and it's probably going to cost those taxpayers $2 to $3 million more estimated in interest because of the cost of interest rates being so much higher than a bond. And so this is really closing that loophole so that we don't have renovations being leased, which make no sense. You could lease a renovation, but as you heard from NHMA, would that make sense? But if you don't have an escape clause, you're going to need the 3/5 majority. So nobody's energy project is going to be stopped. No one's going to have to not do their work. They might need to get 3/5 of the voters to approve it. If you're going to spend $25 million or $6 million, in my school districts, I've had a lease for boilers for $3 million. We had a proposal to lease an elevator and renovation for $2.5 million. So, and as recently this year, and you'll see in the handout you had received, there were 3 more just this year. So this is not a problem that's going away, and it's probably getting worse. So this does not stop any leasing, but if you want to lease, you're going to have to get that 3/5 supermajority. That's the only thing that's really happening here. I think it's important for long-term expenditures for voters. Speaking on behalf of voters, you know, I think that if you're really going to make that long-term commitment and you're going to make that kind of expenditure for multiple years, up to 2 decades even, you really should get the supermajority because it is a big commitment. You can still do your energy savings, you bond it, or you can lease it, but it's still going to be neutral. A bond isn't going to stop you from doing that. You pay the bond and you get your revenue and they cancel out, as you heard. So I think it's a very good bill. I think it will do a lot to help the taxpayers of New Hampshire, and I recommend OTP on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My questions every day. Does anyone else wish to testify?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee for hearing my bill. My name is Brian Seaworth. I represent the town of Pembroke. I am the prime sponsor of this bill. I am also vice chair of the House Labor Committee, which is the committee that heard this bill. From my testimony, I hope you'll agree that this is a minor update of an existing law and not any kind of substantial policy change. The law in question is a provision in the labor statutes that allow an employer, if an employee is deceased, the employer may distribute wages due to the next of kin. The law allows that and also sets up some parameters to limit when that can take place. The law came to my attention a couple of terms ago. We had a joint legislative committee that the intent was to look at labor law and where existing law may be out of date. This was an RSA that was referred by the Department of Labor. If memory serves, their main concern was some of the language in here was difficult and they got some questions. But when it came before that legislative committee, and that was a committee that I had chaired, the committee's attention was drawn to the fact that the amount of this payment is capped at $300, which seemed kind of absurdly low given the intent. And what the committee learned is that the reason it was capped so low is that this RSA was last addressed in 1963. Since 1963, the dollar has lost about 90% of its value. So this bill is presented attempts to correct both of these things. First of all, in terms of the language, rather than describe the inheritance process, we make a direct link to the RSA that describes that. And in terms of the dollar value, we raise it from 300 to 3,000. As I said, that's approximately the rate of inflation between when it was last looked at and now. It also represents $3,000 is somewhere, depending on how you calculate it, between 2.5 to 3+ weeks of the average worker's salary. Or to put it another way, most workers in New Hampshire, if they have an outstanding paycheck, it's going to fall within that amount. The other thing we learned in committee is that $3,000 is probably the low end of what the expenses that family are going to face in the case of a death. When you combine funeral expenses and legal expenses, it's probably going to be more than that. So the committee felt that this was a reasonable adjustment. We think it falls within that housekeeping. We did spend some time, it went to the subcommittee. It was recommended by the House committee unanimously, passed on the consent calendar, and I hope you will find that the bill is equally appropriate. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start 1082 relative to professional limited liability companies, assistant manager status. Representative Turner? There you are. How you doing? Morning. We're still morning, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going to stay through all the way through judiciary and I probably will never leave. Go ahead.
Well, great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Chairman Gannon and member of the committee.
We're lucky you're too.
For taking the time to listen to the bill. I'm here to introduce House Bill 1082, relative to professional limited liability corporations assistant manager status. In summary, the bill is intended to resolve what amounts to a catch-22 in the law, which basically impacts our state's solo practice providers in the licensed professions. The issue was brought to me by a constituent from my district, our district, who operates a solo veterinary practice, basically veterinarian with her husband, who's been sort of the manager of the practice all along. Came to our attention, because essentially operating a solo practice, although it's increasingly rare with all the consolidation, it's also somewhat difficult. And under the current law, there's a unique dilemma that's faced by these organizations in their ability to plan to preserve essentially the corporate value of their practice if they become disqualified, meaning die, disabled, or lose their professional standing. So the bill makes a narrow but important change to RSA 304D, which governs PLLCs, particularly relating to this situation. So the PLLC is a corporate structure that operates within the licensed professions. So under current law, all persons, this is how it's stated, that serve as a quote-unquote manager, meaning a corporate director of a PLLC, must be what's called a qualified person, meaning a member of the profession that the organization operates within. The problem for sole corporate managers is if they become unqualified by, again, death, incapacitation, loss of professional standing, there's nobody remains within the organization that has the authority to act on behalf of the corporation. There's no way to create a succession plan to cover this situation that doesn't involve sort of a tacit agreement with some other member of the licensed profession who is not part of their practice, who is essentially agreeing to step in and dissolve their practice, if this person, for whatever reason loses their standing. So this bill would allow the appointment of what's termed an assistant manager, who is not a qualified person, not a member of the profession, but will be allowed to assume the corporate powers of the manager of the organization for up to 1 year if the solo manager becomes disqualified. So the assistant manager, just to clarify, would not be allowed in any way to operate in a professional capacity, be it law, veterinary practice, medicine, architecture, etc. But they could take a range of corporate actions to preserve what amounts to the both financial and the community value of the corporation. So this could include contracting for professional services, continuing to conduct financial transactions, selling the corporation, converting to a different corporate structure, any one of those, which would allow the corporation to basically retain its value for the individual that had started. So we did have one amendment in the House that clarified, and I want to make it clear that the statute doesn't supersede any professional or ethical standards governing or set forth by the subject profession. And this was added specifically. We didn't hear directly from the Bar Association, but we were shown some language from the Bar Association that they have, which actually speaks to how you ethically should close out a solo practice law corporation. And because the bar falls within the Supreme Court, they operate a little bit differently than the other practices. We did reach out to some of the other, or I did reach out to some of the other professions, who didn't take a position on the bill, but didn't raise any objections to the bill. And that included PLLC. So with that, I'll conclude my testimony. Glad to take any questions.
Thank you. I found it more interesting than most because this applies directly to me, so.
Oh, very good.
Very good. Do we have any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Deputy Secretary, do you wish to testify? You were in and you were out. You're all over the box here. Yeah, this would
you.
be very bad in an SAT because I don't know how it's scored. Go
I
ahead.
don't do well. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Erin Hennessy, I am Deputy Secretary of State. The Corporations Division is within the Secretary of State's office, and so I wanted to testify to this bill to let you know that it would just require some minor changes on the forms that we have for the PLLCs and their registrations or changes that they make for the assistant manager position. But the cost for that would not be anything needed in our budget.
Seeing no questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Zoe Manos, Representative. Good morning, Representative.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Representative Zoe Manos. I represent Rockingham 12, which is Stratham. I'm a member, I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee, and I worked closely with Representative Turer on this bill. It was actually at my request that we included the language on lines 16 through 20 that states that the assistant manager is not to perform any professional judgment within the scope of the profession. So that was included at my request. However, I do have the ability to critique my own work and my work on the committee. And having thought about this bill more, I'm concerned and raise questions about whether there are internal inconsistencies within the bill. And I would like to urge the committee to hear from the New Hampshire Bar Association directly and from the Ethics Committee through the New Hampshire Bar Association. They did not have the opportunity to testify in front of our committee, in front of the Judiciary Committee. Excuse me, the Ethics Committee is meeting on May 8th, and the Board of Governors is meeting on May 16th. And the way that the Bar Association Legislation Committee works is that bills are presented to the Legislation Committee within the Bar Association, or in this case, the Ethics Committee. They then formulate an opinion or a position, and then their recommendation is forwarded to the Board of Governors for their final approval. And so it's only after approval of the Board of Governors that the Bar Association takes a formal position on any bill before the legislature. The inconsistencies that I'm concerned about are, as Representative Turer stated, the assistant manager cannot exercise any professional judgment within the scope of the profession. I'm an attorney, and attorneys need to follow the guidance of the Ethics Committee of the Bar Association for succession planning. And that guidance puts the responsibility for succession planning on the lawyer, who is the sole practitioner in the PLLC, and not creating reliance on an assistant manager to then engage in the process of succession planning. In the absence of, it's my understanding that in the absence of the appointment by the attorney of succession planning, in the absence of doing that and engaging another attorney to step into that person's shoes, the courts would appoint an attorney to wind down the practice. And so again, I think there's a conflict and an inconsistency, at least with attorneys and law practices, about how a PLLC would be wound down on the death or incapacity of the sole practitioner. So again, I think it's important for you to hear from the Ethics Committee through the Bar Association, and I would therefore ask that you hold off on execing this bill until after you can hear from them. Thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Seeing none, thank you. Representative Hope Damon? Oh, that's okay. I'm just as happy. Anyone else wish to testify on 1082? Seeing none? Okay. Which is an act relative to accessory dwelling units. Dwelling units allowed, the number allowed by right. And Representative Ellen Reed is going to introduce the bill. Good morning. Still morning.
Still morning indeed. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, honorable members. I have some handouts. Sorry, these two just for the committee, but then this is for. Thank you. For the record, my name is Ellen Reed. I represent Rockingham, which is Newmarket and Newfields. So this issue came to me approximately 4 years ago when a constituent reached out to me. Our town, which was then under a different town planner, had denied him the ability to build an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, for his aging mother-in-law in his detached garage. And he was kind of incensed because even then we were experiencing a housing crisis and he didn't understand why he wouldn't be allowed within a completely already existing structure to increase housing supply on his own in a housing crisis. So I called up the then town planner to see what could be done. And she responded to me when I talked about the need to create more housing, especially for people who work and support our community. She said, oh, those people, we already do enough for those people. They have the trailer parks and the apartments. And that is the attitude that I've been fighting ever since. So at that time, about 10 or 12 years ago, I think, we passed a bill signed into law that allowed one ADU by right, but it allowed the towns to restrict a certain number of things. And what we've seen is that the good faith effort to allow that by right, thinking that towns would use those restrictions reasonably, hasn't really kind of been enacted in good faith in some cases. That towns have put on kind of extraordinary restrictions in the case of my constituent insisting, because in the current existing law, one ADU is allowed by right, but a town can require it be attached. But they decided to interpret that completely contained within a detached, pre-existing detached structure was not attached, and then required him to build a 300-foot long catwalk to attach the primary dwelling with the barn or the garage. Which of course adds to the visual densities, and it was really nonsensical to require that. So So I actually had this bill in last year, but since then, the Special Committee on Housing has had multiple hours from multiple different organizations on both sides of the spectrum present to us about ADUs specifically as part of what we call the missing middle. And the committee has gone through several sessions of wordsmithing, which has resulted in the bill that you have before you right now. So, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but as you know, housing is our largest crisis in this state. It is worse than it ever has been in this state before. Voters of both sides of the political spectrum say it is the number one issue impacting the state, their number one voting issue in the state, not federal, but state. When we talk about the crisis of the graying of New Hampshire, what we're really talking about is the housing crisis, because housing is the reason we cannot keep or attract young working people to this state. New Hampshire is a very desirable place to live in almost every other respect. But under our current situation, workers are forced out. We have the highest increasing rate of homelessness of any state. We're currently increasing at 52% a year homelessness. And the point here is that we can't expect to have people drive our propane trucks or prepare our food or clean our office buildings and not make room for them in our communities. If we want those people to exist in our communities, then they have to have somewhere to live. So states everywhere, because we are not the only state experiencing housing crisis, states everywhere are actually doing the same thing that this bill does, which is decrease the restrictions on ADUs. Specifically, Mercatus, which is a free market think tank at George Mason University, has deep dived into the data across the country. I've submitted one of their studies. They were very active in helping the formation of this bill. They've also told me that they are at your service and I can provide their contact information for you to talk to them directly. I've also given you an independent handout of their informational testimony on this bill in the House. So ADUs are the lowest hanging fruit solution to the housing crisis. And I'm not claiming it's going to solve the housing crisis on its own, but I think you'll be surprised how much it can do for the housing crisis. It's the lowest hanging fruit for a number of reasons. It is really, truly the gentlest form of density. It is that crowdsourcing, victory garden, decentralized way of getting to increased density that does not look like density. You don't know when you pass by a beautiful 5-acre lot with a farmhouse that there's an apartment in the barn or in the garage. So in the hearing in the House side on this, we had someone testify, and he said, it was a student, he was testifying in favor of the bill, and he said that if you can't accept home additions and barn apartments and little cottages, then you'll never accept the bigger suggestions like low-income apartment buildings. That if you're opposed to even this, then you're unserious about dealing with the housing crisis. So I just wanted to quote what he said. So this issue has brought together a huge coalition of people of all like political leanings, from people who are typically on the right, like planners, developers, builders, Realtors Association, Mercatus, as I already said, private property advocates, and then people who are typically on the left, housing advocates, disability community advocates, students, homeless community advocates. So it's really been a wonderful experience to work with such a large coalition of people. So the benefits of ADUs, as I said, they're that decentralized victory garden approach to supply. We are currently in a approximately 60,000 supply shortage in this state. And they are part of that missing middle. So the missing middle housing is things like ADUs, duplexes, not the big kind of less affordable single-family homes, but also not kind of uncomfortable apartment living, something in the middle. And we really don't have that in this state. ADUs tend to be higher quality because, especially in this bill, as it's already in the current law, towns can require that the person building an ADU be a homeowner occupier, meaning it's not going to be a developer that's going to buy up a bunch of single-family homes and add whatever, however many 2 ADUs per home or what have you. It's going to be the person who's living in that home, who owns that home, who says, I would like a space to house my aging mother or my adult child, or a family member who has disabilities, or maybe rent it out to help defray my own mortgage so that I can stay here. Or maybe they want to move into the ADU and then rent out the larger space. So that brings me to another piece, which is ADUs are considered life cycle housing for those reasons. Your adult child may move into one, but then you may move into it yourself, or you may move your elderly parent into it. As I was saying, they are higher quality because you're building on your own property. So you're not a developer building builder grade stuff. You want it to be nice. And you want it to be nice because you might actually move into it, or you're housing a family member in there. They're also lower cost. They're typically 20% under the market rate for a similar square footage apartment. And really, why wouldn't we allow the haves, so to speak, the people who own homes and can afford to do this, to independently help the have-nots by creating housing that is higher quality and more affordable. And very frequently, it's more enjoyable to live there because you have a direct relationship with your landlord, who's not in the business of being landlord. They work a normal job or what have you, but that means like you can negotiate with them. Maybe you can use part of the garden to garden for yourself, or you can have a dog or what have you. It really builds that sense of community. But most importantly, and I touched on this, it also helps home ownership. When we talk about the housing crisis, we often talk about rentals. But the thing that helps communities is increasing home ownership. And if you can include the projected rental income of your property, because it has an ADU, and the bank that's lending to you includes that as part of your income, you are more easily able to buy, and you're more easily able to defray the cost of your mortgage. And in fact, multiple banks and Fannie Mae have already gone through and formulaically determined how to project what the income is for an ADU on a property so that they can lend according to that. So I do want to go through the details of the actual bill. So first, it changes the definition of attached to include completely contained within a pre-existing detached structure. It does allow a second ADU by conditional use. I understand, of course, that there's an amendment to remove that piece. I want to commend the efforts to get to a compromise position that everybody can be happy. I think that even without the second ADU, it's a huge step forward and a huge benefit. I personally still feel that the second ADU is really good. The conditional use would be conditioned upon several things. A town could require a half acre or more, and I'm just speaking to the bill as it currently is written. A half acre, by the way, is considered a spacious suburban lot. The most common lot size for a single family home is 0.2 acres. So a half acre, that's across the country. So a half acre is over twice as much as the most common lot size that exists. It would require the conditional, it may require under 850 square feet for anything over the first ADU. As I already said, they can require an owner occupier, and it can require that anything after a first ADU be attached. So no additional floor or footprint. The bill also says that no setbacks or aesthetic requirements can be placed on an ADU that aren't already on the primary structure, which is extremely reasonable. That was another kind of de facto way towns could get around allowing an ADU. It allows for one additional parking spot per unit. The law already restricts ADUs associated with multifamily or townhouse and multifamily structures like townhouses, so that's not touched. The law already allows for towns to require adequate water and sewage disposal, so that's not touched either. And that also includes, I was reached out to by New Hampshire Lakes, and they wanted to make sure that this didn't impact them. I had OLS do the research, and it doesn't, because towns can already require an additional setback. The setback on the state level is 75 feet from a water body. Towns can require additional. This is not impacting that whatsoever. And the law already allows towns to require owner occupancy. So this is not developers. I touched on that. And the law already requires or allows towns to require that it be, that can restrict down to 2 bedrooms for an ADU, and that is not touched either. It does raise the level, the size that a town can say an ADU can be, the max size, from 750 to 1,000 square feet. So a couple weeks ago, I came to the State House with my tape measure and I measured this room. This room is 1,122 square feet, 44 by 23 and a half, if I remember. So that means an ADU, the largest ADU that is permitted in this, would fit within, comfortably within this room, probably ending around your table. So just briefly, because it is in the existing version of the bill before you, the reason I think the second ADU is important is that the rest of the bill says that anything after 1 ADU, the town can restrict the rent amounts to workforce housing levels. A lot of towns want to get to their legal requirement for workforce housing, so that would help them. But also, being able to restrict to workforce housing levels also is what de facto prevents that second ADU from being rented as a short-term rental. And that was a concern initially raised. I really didn't want to add the word short-term rental because I didn't want the Airbnb lobbyists up here, but I thought this was a great de facto way of getting around that. So I just want to really quickly go through the things that towns can still do. They can require owner-occupier. They can limit to no more than 2 ADUs. They can restrict the size. Oh, I did want to talk about size. So the 1,000 square feet, the reason that was important to lift is because at 750, you're really only talking about a single occupant for the most part, maybe a couple. But if the whole point is to have, okay, thank you, I'm sorry. If the whole point is to have families, working families, be in a stable living environment so that they can continue to work here, then we really need to give them something big enough to be stable in. And you really don't get to that until you get to about 1,000 square feet minimum. Towns can also require parking. They require design standards so long as it's consistent with the primary structure. They can prohibit anything beyond a first ADU on anything smaller than a half acre. They can require it to be attached over the first ADU. And as I said, they can require workforce housing and no short-term rentals on anything over the first ADU. So having said all that, the worst density, if you want to call it bad, the most dense that you would see, the most density you would see would be a homeowner occupier on a half-acre lot with a house with a bump on and a little cottage in the back. And that's why we call it gentle density. That doesn't look like density. So you're going to, it's my last sentence, you're going to hear opposition about the concerns, fears about density, and fears about maybe some people that they don't want in their communities coming into their communities. And I don't really think anybody has a right to prohibit other people into their communities. And I think what we've seen in this state is the effect of not letting certain people into your communities. And the effect is we don't have workers. So with that, I just think it's the easiest way to start working on the housing crisis. I'm happy to take questions, and thank you for your patience with my testimony.
I'll be quick because Senator Ricciardi will cover more than I'm going to. What percent of towns are already doing this, doing the 1 ADU?
Every town has to allow 1 ADU, but they de facto prevent it through overly restrictive parking requirements. We've heard towns requiring like 4 parking spaces for a 1-bedroom ADU, and other like the aesthetic and setback requirements. They're not applied currently to the actual primary structure, things like that.
I could ask you more, but she's dying to ask you.
I'm so sorry.
So I'm gonna let her go first. Go ahead, do them all.
Thank you for coming and your testimony. Nobody, I think, can argue that we don't have a housing issue. It's not just a housing issue, it's affordable. That's the key word. But if the chair will indulge me, I have a couple of comments and questions. I was happy to hear that you brought up the Mercatus Institute because according to their records, New Hampshire has more ADUs per single-family home than elsewhere in the country, according to their study. That's interesting. Our data that's collected by the Department of Business and Economic Affairs shows that 206 municipalities with zoning have adopted local zoning ordinances allowing ADUs. That's good news. And over 107 of those municipalities already allow for detached units. Again, I think that that's good news. So knowing that what we need isn't just housing, but we need affordable units. And because cities and towns are already voluntarily doing this, what would this policy mandate propose? What data do you have that would support that this would actually lead to more affordable housing by putting in such a mandate?
Thank you. So I did touch on most of those things in my testimony, but I'm happy to reiterate. So let me see if I can go through everything you just said. So first of all, the number of towns. So all towns have to, it's our law right now. They have to, but they get around it. Much like my constituent who wasn't allowed to have his completely contained within a detached garage. You would have never known it was an apartment, but he wasn't allowed because the towns are allowed to require attached. And so they were insisting that he build a 300-foot catwalk in between the house and the barn. So that's the kind of thing that towns do. When you said 107 towns allow a detached, so that's 1/3 of all the municipalities. It's interesting you brought up that we have the most ADUs per house, I think you said.
Per single family.
Per single family
And
house.
anywhere else.
Because we have the second least dense lot sizes of the entire country. So that means we have an average lot size of an acre, which is much, much larger. The only state that's less dense than that is Vermont. So even though we have the most ADUs, we still have the second least density in terms of lot sizes. So there is room to grow. And then there was another point that you brought up. Do you remember?
Yes.
Oh, I did. There was one other thing. So what this will do, because we have another study, which will be cited by another person testifying, that because of those de facto restrictions that towns have placed, there's something like 40,000 additional ADUs, people who said they would build an ADU for sure if the town didn't prevent them. That's 40,000 extra units in the next few years. Our shortage is 60,000. Now, with the second ADU, that increases even more. And it was testimony in our committee by somebody who was smarter than me, said that number could be as high as 90,000. But that's what that would do. So what was the other thing you had said?
I just had one follow-up question. You pretty much covered everything else. Is that okay, Mr. Chair? So how does this bill address the cost and requirements for the build-out of infrastructure needs and density concerns around clean water and sewer?
Oh, well, actually, there was another thing that you had said is that you had just reminded me. It was the last thing in your last comment, and I apologize. It was, affordability, that the issue is affordability. I 100%, because I think a lot of the narrative that I'm getting from people on the other side of the aisle is that all it is supply. You just need supply, work with the developers, and that will solve the problem. And I actually don't believe that that's the case. Because I think I've seen college towns where they did increase supply. I lived next to a college town. They constantly increase supply. The number of students never goes up, and yet the average price goes up. So the thing in this, so first of all, ADUs in particular are 20% below market value in general on average. So that just having an ADU makes it more affordable. Having the workforce housing on it, where towns after the first ADU, they can require workforce housing. Yes, it de facto prevents it from going into short-term rental, but also that guarantees affordability. So that affordability is built into this bill. In terms of the cost, you mean the cost of like infrastructure to the town. So the town
You have to have, clean water and sewer. I mean, and that's,
Right.
those are going to be cost. These are issues, we're already facing this now. I'm like the water warrior around here. So
Right.
I have concerns about the infrastructure needs, cost requirements for that build out for clean water and sewer.
So the current law already is very broad. It says the town can require adequate. It doesn't say what adequate means. And much like with adequate parking, the towns have interpreted it very broadly. They can require whatever parking they want. Similarly, they can require whatever they need for water. And most of it's going to be septic, right? And so that's where maybe setbacks from water bodies would come into play. But if you're talking about on a lot that's serviced by sewage, I believe that also means that the town can require an impact fee if they're thinking that that particular structure is going to impact their sewer.
Because most of the towns in my district are on septic. And you know how that goes, a family of four, the septic size is built for this. So that is a concern and something that I think needs to be
But
addressed.
the town can prevent even the first ADU, currently, the town can prevent any ADU, and I didn't touch that provision, if they don't have adequate water supply, meaning we're already having our wells run dry, we can't afford any more building, we cannot approve an ADU, and they're well within their legal right to do that under the current law, which I did not touch. Or they say, you know what, we can't afford any more septic, or I don't know how they would do the study for that, but however they would determine that, they can say that we are not going to allow another ADU. They can require adequate.
Thank you so much for taking my questions and attempting to help make some resolutions to this problem.
Thank you.
Just a quick question, not to address the amendment that hasn't come up yet, but in theory, that's one unit, detached or attached. So the thought behind it is we're going to take care of a lot of your problem of inadequate housing, but at the same time, we're not going to change the tenor and character of neighborhoods so drastically. What are your thoughts on that as opposed to better, but you want what you want, right?
I'm not sure I know what you're referencing exactly. Can you be more clear?
There's an amendment coming with something.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll just
No, I
wait.
read it. I read the amendment, and it's really, obviously, I do like the second ADU a lot, but otherwise, I like the amendment, which is really the only thing the amendment.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can you, I didn't know what you were actually
No,
asking.
we'll just-
Well, in terms of like impacting character, again, ADUs it's very gentle. You don't see an ADU most of the times, and if you do, it's going to be a small cottage, right? Like if it's detached and it's truly its own structure, but otherwise, it's inside a barn, it's inside a garage, or it's just a little bump out on a house that just looks like a house. So yeah, we preserve our rural character.
Senator Shanley, you all set? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience. Yeah.
Thanks for your testimony. Lots of people. Vanessa Blaze? Aaron, I'm just going to wait on that.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for hearing me speak today. My name is Vanessa Blaze, and I serve as the Director of Policy and Planning for the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities. I'm providing testimony on behalf of the DD Council membership, which believes that HB 1291 would have a positive impact on the disability community. Our council by law is comprised of at least 60% of people with developmental disabilities and their parents or guardians. These members are volunteers who advocate for disability justice. As we are all aware by now, there is a housing crisis in the state. This crisis unproportionately affects disabled people. Increasing allowance of construction of accessory dwelling units without the barriers of added cost and red tape would provide immeasurable benefits to not only those in the disability community who may benefit from long-term housing and support, but also those who wish to age in place and the caregivers who support them. This crisis has forced parents to reconsider group homes for their adult children, something that New Hampshire has decided to abolish with the promise of supporting disabled people to live self-determined lives in their own communities. While group homes may give disabled people a place to stay, it does not afford them the same rights of home that we all wish to enjoy. Disabled adults have the right to independent living spaces even when they need supports. They want to live in the community with their friends and family and the opportunities to pursue a life of meaning and engagement. Accessory dwelling units can serve as close proximity independent housing while providing them with the support and care when needed. Expansion of rights to build ADUs can be one of the many strategies we can have at our disposal that will enable people to stay in their community where they experience natural supports. It also addresses the belief that the responsibility and benefits of providing housing should be shared by all of our towns and municipalities. The council has identified affordable, stable, and appropriate housing as a major barrier to living an inclusive life of meaning in their community. We appreciate your consideration on expanding housing options and opportunities for people with disabilities and those who support them.
Thank you. Quick question. Again, I like the idea of, I have a friend in Sandown who has big property and they have their son with them in an ATU, and they're close and provides the family. And I see other benefits with one ADU, perhaps, so you could maintain, you can't afford the taxes, and all our towns are going up so crazy. So as you stop working, it will allow you to stay in your property. Why two? So two to me is like, now my neighborhood of 50 houses will have up to 150 families between 3 units. So you're really changing a neighborhood into something it wasn't with this many. So I have a problem with the 2 units. Do you see my problem? And would you be more apt to like my one?
I understand the concern about 2 units. We accept the idea of having 1, if that is the compromise.
Okay.
2 is ideal, and if you can just imagine that you are a family with an adult child who needs supports, and how ideal it would be to be able to provide a source of housing for their support staff, so that they could still live independently, but could be in close proximity and also have affordable housing.
My other thing I'm picturing is, we have a lot of cars in our 50 houses on my street. Now we could have triple the cars. Changing the character of the front yards we have one house that has a lot of people in it, and they probably have 9 or 10 cars, and that really changes the whole neighborhood right there. So I fear as you go into bigger and bigger multiple ADUs that a lot of problems, from Senator Shardy's water and septic problems to just the whole tenor of the neighborhood being very different with triple the number of people. But anyways, thank you.
You're welcome.
Greg Moore. I didn't see you, Greg. Clayton Wood, Representative. How you doing, sir? Good afternoon. You're the first afternoon person.
Oh.
Don't go too long into my afternoon.
I feel honored. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Senators. For the record, my name is Representative Clayton Wood. I represent Merrimack, District 13, Pittsfield, and Chichester. I also served for over 10 years on the Pittsfield Planning Board and worked closely with the zoning board. The people who are bringing, I oppose HB 1291. It's not needed at all. The Senator already gave some of my testimony. We pretty much lead the country in ADUs. We've been doing ADUs before this House passed what I call our ADU 1.0. We've been doing that. There's been places over garages forever. A lot of the information they're giving you is misleading. Simple things like even assuring that the owner is still living in the house is almost impossible to do. It's almost impossible to know how many people are living in anywhere in our community. I was there 10 years. I still act as an advisor to our planning board because I've been trained. They spent a lot of time training me, and I took that effort. The ADU system's working. It's working. Sometimes if I came in here and every time a constituent comes up to me and says that they've been passed over by the planning board or the zoning board, I'd have a bill every day. Every time, every third Thursday of the month, there's a discussion on people's rights to know of the bill, and depending on what side of the line you live on, those things are all over the place. So there's always, you can always find examples where the local bodies have failed. This bill just goes too far. They're the last people to tell you what your community needs. Yes, this looks like a magic elixir to the housing project. And in a lot of cases it is, but it's up to the owner how they want to do it. We know of a lot of people that have family members living at home, so there's absolutely no problem. But we also know of other problems that we do have. And when I was on the planning board when we did ADU 1, and we worked pretty hard in our community. We did like everything else, local law, the board went to the local law and said, how are we going to do this? We have separate units because the local community felt it was the right thing to do, not people up in Concord. The other thing is there's a lot of towns in this state. This is a one-size-fits-all to handle a situation where every community is different. We in Pittsfield have water in a very tight community, and we have a sewer system in a very tight community. Everywhere else it's very, very different. So what we allow people to do for ADUs is bent on a lot of things. Now, a simple statement like a septic system, well, the planning board could stop it because of the septic system. It is very difficult to assess a septic system. We do it all the time. It's very, very difficult. And if you don't really know how many people are living there, it's impossible. So 2 units, I think you've already said what was on my agenda here as well. But the subtle stuff with this bill just really gets me that, to think that we up here know what's good for these towns. So, this is the reason why I came here. This is my second year, first term. I came here because of the local control. I love the local control. And I see a bill like this, I don't get it. I really don't get it. Give it back to the bill. I think you mentioned a little bit of my last thunder. These type of changes that are made, it's subtle how it affects the town. I don't know if you know anything about Pittsfield, but I can tell you a history of a mess from people wanting to make sure people have places to live. The towns get stuck with the end result, and Pittsfield has an end result, and that's not why I'm here to talk about this bill. I'm talking about everybody else trying to do the right thing for their town. Now, I know there's a lot of emotion when it comes to these type of things, but there's nobody's got more stake in the town than the planning board and the zoning board. We have the ability to ruin that town. I've seen, and I fought for changes so that somebody wouldn't make a bad investment and the town wouldn't get stuck with a bad plan that you can't get rid of. We got property that is in our town that is ruined. And I wasn't there for, and we tried. There's nothing I can do to fix it. So there's so many things that can go bad. It's crazy. But these type of subtle changes, I think, as you mentioned, Senator, when you go into the character, they take years to change. The downtown of Pittsfield didn't change like that, but now it's a problem. So these type of things, they change. I really wish you reconsider this bill and ITL it. That's where it belongs. The ADU unit works now, and I'm sorry if some planning boards are a little difficult. There's a lot of boards that are difficult, including some of the ones I'm on. So if you have any questions,
Thank you,
I appreciate
Representative.
it.
I think we're all set. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
Thank you so much.
Representative Len Turcott. Good morning, Representative. I'm glad you could fly in.
Just home last night. Representative Gannon, yeah, right, Senator Gannon. Good morning, everybody. Afternoon. Name is Representative Len Turcott. I'm a 4th-term legislator. In the past, I've served on multiple committees. This year, I am the chairman of the Municipal and County Government Committee in the House. Give you a few quick bullet points, what I'll call my executive overview. Accessory dwelling units, in this case, what this bill is, I'm also strongly in favor of an ITL motion on this, by the way. This legislation is not about giving back property rights, as some of the proponents have said. It's actually, this is zoning by the state in a one-size-fits-all manner rather than by the municipalities doing it through the warrant article process. When zoning is done by the state using the top-down, we take away the property rights of most of the existing property owners that benefit a few possible special interests and a few individuals. If the stated goal of the sponsors is really to give property rights back, why not just remove zoning altogether? We know the answer to that. Single-family residential lots would now be converted to 3-family rental properties by right. That's a bureaucratic state mandate. Rental triplexes in the names of accessory dwelling units. Current RSAs already allow municipalities to make the zoning changes by warrant article, and the current RSAs already allow ADUs. Single-family homes will be bought by developers, eliminating single-family housing supply and exacerbating the already low supply of single-family housing. HB 1291 will permanently alter the face of single-family neighborhoods forever. It'll be gradual. The morphing will be gradual. It'll take 5-10 years. But when we look back, it's going to be, everybody's going to look at it and go, what did we do? It's too late. And above all, it sets a really dangerous precedent of central planning zoning by the state. So we all know what this legislation does. It adds, makes it by mandate 2 additional rental units on a property, 1 attached, 1 unattached. It increases the size of the units to 1,000 square feet on one of them and 800, and that's a minimum. So if a municipality doesn't limit their size of the ADU or have it in their the regulations, you could actually end up with ADUs that are bigger than the residential unit itself. The other question that I've been unable to get answer is when you talk about 1,000 square feet or 850 square feet, is that living area? Is that the footprint of the structure? We don't know. If you have a garage, convert it to a rental unit. If you have additional space above the garage, convert it to a rental unit. Have a big shed in the background, in your backyard, convert it to a rental unit. According to the legislation, the second rental shall, emphasis on the word shall, be required to meet the definition of workforce housing, and shall be required to meet the definition of affordable, as contained in the RSAs. This is simply a form of indirect rent control, and the House has already killed 2 bills dealing with rent control this session. Now, on smaller lots, rental units 1 and 2, plus the primary residence could literally take up almost every square foot of the property. So where would the cars park? I heard Senator Gannon mention the potential for increases in cars. Well, the bill covers that. And it says, at a legally dedicated off-site location at the property owner's discretion. Where is that? Is that going to be a block away, 2 blocks? Half a mile, several miles from the property? What is more likely is that the renters would end up parking on and clogging up the streets in front of the units. So impact on communities, Senator Gander mentioned several times the word character. I think of where my mom grew up in the north end of Manchester in a single family neighborhood. So when you and I go in and we buy a property in a single family neighborhood, we have an expectation that when we buy it, whatever is the zoning at the time, I have an expectation that that's going to continue unless my town through a warrant article decides to change it. But now your neighborhood is going to change dramatically, not for the better, for the most part. Worst of all, you and your neighbors will have no input in determining the matter because the zoning change was made and dictated by the central planners in Concord. Next, there will be increases demand on municipal water and sewer infrastructure. There will be an increased police and EMT presence and increased trash collections. What's the cost going to be for the taxpayers? Are the required sewer and water upgrades, those going to be paid for by the state? If not, this is an state unfunded mandate. How many new kids are going to be enrolling when these rental units have 1 or 2 or more children living on the property? Yeah, you'll have a little bit of extra property tax income, 1,000 or 2 collected for the additional rental units. Is that going to justify $20,000 per kid in additional taxes? Who's going to pick up the difference? It's going to be the rest of the taxpayers. I heard Senator Gannon ask about the amendment, which I did review. I will say, in the House municipal and county government, we try to not make bad bills less bad. While I appreciate what is being tried to do here, I will say that attached or detached by as a matter of right, I note as one of the changes, and then on the second page, a municipality shall permit. This amendment can already be done by a municipality. And I know we have somebody, I think from the NHMA will talk about the percentage of towns already doing this. But the amendment is not needed because it can already be done. Almost finished. So, in closing, the additional rental structures would be a mandate at the state level. This is central planning at its worst. Municipalities can already make their own changes of zoning through warrant articles. I heard the previous speaker talk about individuals up here making the decision, and it was like he was reading off my sheet of paper. A few enlightened politicians in Concord or special interest groups do not understand and know the needs and wants of distant municipalities such as Pittsburgh up north, or Hampton on the seacoast, or Lebanon in the west, or Nashua, or your cities. The individuals in those cities, the citizens, the planning boards, the selectmen, those are the ones that know. To believe that politicians up here and bureaucrats think we know better than you is simply wrong. And I would ask that you do not infringe on the municipality's role of zoning. One size fits all, top-down mandate is not the avenue we should be traveling. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative. Go ahead, Senator Shanley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative, thank you for your testimony. You and others have discussed the fact that we already have ADUs. There is already a requirement that towns allow for them with certain potential conditions. But you also argued that if this bill passes, the repercussions would be devastating. What makes that so? What is so different about this bill as opposed to the existing law that it would be devastating?
The existing law allows an ADU. It doesn't mandate it. It allows it. So it means the towns can go through and implement the ADUs. When you start going to two, I'll give you the example of my mom's neighborhood where she grew up in Manchester. When you start packing two ADUs onto a single lot, so you have three residential units, you have the impact on taxes, you have the impact on sewer, you have the impact on water. Basically, what ends up happening is all the other taxpayers in the town who didn't get to vote on the warrant article change end up making up the difference. The easiest example is the one with kids. All right, so you have let's just say you have one ADU already there, and now you build or you convert a garage to a second one, and you have a family of four move in there. The additional revenue to the town for property taxes is going to be what, maybe a couple $1,000s. You have two kids in there. Each kid, average in the state of New Hampshire, is $20,000. So you're talking $40,000 in increase tax burden, while the property owner is actually only kicking in about $2,000. The rest of that $38,000 gets spread to the rest of the taxpayers. The other thing is, this is going to happen over a slow period of time. It's not going to happen overnight. And that's the insidious nature of this, is that it happens slowly until you get to a point. I could give you some analogies from some things I did in the past that would make no sense to you, but it's the same kind of thing. You got to look out into the future and assess what's going to happen a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. We can't just say, oh, we have a housing crisis, we got to do this now. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. And if I could follow up, do we have any evidence that families with children are more likely or less likely to rent an ADU?
I have no data on that. Absolutely not.
Thank you, Representative Turcotte. Seeing no other questions, you were always clear.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Representative Clayton Wood, you're going to be our last speaker today. Oh, you already won. Okay, I didn't check you out. Barbara Seratois, representative. Am I saying it at all close? I don't know. The nuns failed on your handwriting, but is it, take a look, Shanley. How about, who haven't we called here? I was trying to make out that name. But it doesn't.
Comtois, Representative Comtois.
How about Rebecca Sky? So we're gonna, after Rebecca Sky, because we're out of time and we're losing the room and we gotta exec a bill, we will pick up here and continue this hearing after you next Tuesday at 9:30.
Thank you, Senator Gannon, and member of the committee, for hearing my testimony. My name is Rebecca Sky. I'm the Executive Director for the State Commission on Aging, which Senator Gannon is familiar with as he's a member of the commission. So the Commission on Aging is supports the efforts to increase number of accessory dwelling units. The availability and affordability of housing is a priority concern for the Commission on Aging as it impacts older adults, especially those on fixed incomes, and the direct care workforce who provide services to older adults whose wages are low. In addition, survey after survey suggests that people overwhelmingly prefer to age in their homes rather than move to a new setting toward the end of their lives. Accessory dwelling units are advantageous for New Hampshire as they assist older homeowners to, one, maintain their independence by providing additional income to offset increasing property taxes and repair costs, provide housing for a caregiver. Out-of-pocket costs in residential settings may be out of reach of many who need long-term care. Building an ADU to entice a caregiver to provide care could be a lower-cost housing alternative for an older adult. And three, ADUs can become a resident's home if they wish to downsize, allowing them to rent out the main house or to have family move in. ADUs are beneficial for direct care workers as they can provide below-market housing. As mentioned, sometimes this sometimes happens in exchange for carrying out household chores or to support tasks as in home share programs. And just to wrap up, because I know we want to keep this brief, and this is really a question for everybody in the room. Where do you plan to live when you are 80 years old, 85 years old, 90 years old? And where do you think your caregivers might live when you're at those ages? So with that, thank you so much for hearing me out.
I hope to be on the beach in Naples, but that's a different story. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we conclude this hearing.